Okay, this is episode 26 of OverSight. Usual host, Thorin. Being very precise with my words, as I always am. Because here's the thing. I leave nothing up to interpretation. I mean exactly what I say. And only what I say. I was too smug with the way I did that.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if you're keeping a straight face.
I should have downplayed it more. Like that's the problem I have. I oversell stuff, you know. So anyway, me, as usual, back again. Still haven't got rid of me, but keep trying, you know. keep up the good fight, you know. Listen, took England a few years to get rid of Germany, but we did it in the end, so you stick with it. Maybe you could succeed as well. Now, Monty, a lot of stuff has been and gone since the last episode. You know what? We've actually started to get that really bad luck that for some reason also follows my Counter-Strike podcast I did with Richard. Well, we've noticed this, right? I don't know for that one as to whether people do it on purpose, but I have noticed, because on that one, we do just go like fully raw on all like roster moves, and we sort of like anytime anyone says something in a public statement that seems like a lie, we do just wreck them. And I've noticed suspiciously almost all trades and transfers in Counter-Strike now happen one day after our show, just so it makes it like less likely by the time the next week comes, you know, that's still fresh in our minds, and we're all going like I don't know if that's happened. Well, anyway, that has started to happen to us, Monty, because it's almost like the second we like cut the tape on the last one was where Boston Uprising obviously had their roster change. In whatever circumstances they may, in fact, have had that roster change.
Whatever circumstances, yes.
That obviously led to one of the main storylines of this week. So I think we should start with that. So actually, I want to ask you this first of all, Monty, because one thing I found I think I would say disappointing actually about this last week and coverage of the esports side of Overwatch League was that because of the circumstances surrounding why DreamKazper was removed, which obviously is a circumstance no team wants to be associated with, no org wants to be associated, no fucking league wants to be associated, no one does basically, right? In that kind of a world, yes, there's going to be kind of an incentive to say, you know what, he's out, forget about that guy, let's forget he ever existed, in fact, we're all moving forwards, no point thinking about the past. But in doing so, beyond social media, I felt like there was way too many people who did try to like downplay who he was as a player and his role within the Boston Uprising. Like there was a lot of people I saw saying stuff like, he was just any old DPS play, you know, you could replace him with pretty much anyone, you know, and there's no real reason as to why he was like a key player or why Boston, you know, beyond the circumstances of what he actually did, should be that sad to have lost him, you know. Like before we get into this amazing match they had this week, when you hear, if all you hear on paper, Monty, is DreamKazper's out of Boston Uprising, what would your initial reaction to that be? Because obviously we never got it on the show last week.
No, and we didn't get it on the show last week because that information was literally coming out while we were recording it, and I was aware of it because I was looking at Twitter and the Pro Player Discord and everything, but obviously we couldn't comment on it because I hadn't had a chance to read anything yet. Like I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I just knew bad shit was happening. So that was the reason behind last week. I know a lot of people were looking for that juicy drama. I think we addressed it. I obviously wanted to talk a lot about how it was going to impact their games, and I did on Watchpoint on the preview show. I did discuss how I thought that it was really going to hurt Boston, and that was the reasons why. And we tried to, at least from the league side, we didn't want to get into what actually happened because, again, there's like... I
mean, it's irrelevant. The fact he's out is all that really matters, right?
Exactly. So, and also the thing about it is it's unclear, you know, if
it's also an ongoing case. No one knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
It's actually, it would actually be irresponsible to officially comment on that. Like, this is a talk show. We can do what we want, but even then, it's not really relevant to this topic, is it?
No, and like, obviously... It looks very bad from the documents that have been released, but if there are more people or there were actual like in-person interactions, like we don't know any of this at this current time. Yes. So it's really hard to say anything about it besides the fact that it looks pretty fucking gross and bad. So we tried to focus on the actual in-game effect of it. And I talked about it in the game of New York and Boston when I was casting it because even though, like, obviously they were doing much better than anybody could have expected, and then talking about how Even though they are doing well, the fact that Ilios was one of their best maps, and it was one of their best maps because of DreamKazper's Pharah play, so it was going to hurt them not having him on the Pharah on that map in particular, which it did. But still, the performance was very good. But I mean, I don't really know what to say right now, because there's not really, like, until we get actual more information, and probably like I would assume like a legal or police investigation, like there's nothing really to say besides like, let's actually just talk about the team and how it's going to affect Boston. But
yes, exactly.
I don't think it was really, we tried really hard not to sweep it under the rug, and like we talked about it on Watchpoint. I tried to talk about it during my cast. I'm sure the desk talked about it as well. So we just tried to focus on how it was going to affect the actual in-game play.
Okay, Jayne, so welcome to the show. You're obviously appearing as a
Thanks for the
guest.
invite.
You've been a coach. People can see you streaming, doing videos where you kind of teach people some of the aspects of the game. Let me ask you the same question then, before we move on to the future of the Boston Uprising. Right, before, whenever I watched Boston, the two main players that I noticed was Gamsu, because I already knew him from League of Legends and obviously the earlier days when he was in Apex. And then, yeah, the guy who actually was the revelation in the team to me was DreamKazper, because I didn't really know this guy. I didn't watch NA before, except like some of the contenders stuff. And so when I saw how when they were winning games, he seemed like what a great find. You know, how they found this guy. What was kind of his role within the team? And before, obviously, we get into the matches that they had, what did you think of losing him as a player from the team?
Oh, you know, DreamKazper was just known for being an absolutely incredible flex player. And when you're looking at, teams like Seoul, where they have to decide whether they're going to have like a 9 out of 10 player on Widowmaker and like a 1 out of 10 player on Tracer, they're just trying to find, people who are the best across the averages. They don't have any weakness in their roster. Boston never really seemed to have that struggle, because no matter what DreamKazper flexed onto, he seemed not only strong on those characters, but what could be considered basically top of his class. We're talking about a guy who was almost unanimously being considered for the United States World Cup team, which is going to be in very high in contention, just like the Korean team. So just that alone is going to speak to how highly regarded he was as a player. So I don't spend a lot of time, on Twitter or social commentators or whatnot, but within the groups that I hang out with, there was a lot of people very concerned that what looked to be kind of Boston's resurgence into the upper echelons of the actual standing, that was going to be railroaded. That this was Boston was looking so hopeful, they were on the road to improvement, and then DreamKazper kind of crushed that. And Gamsu, yes, but Striker has been also really thoroughly impressing myself, and we saw in the Boston New York game that DreamKazper, he's going to leave a void, and the roster lock, unfortunately, the timing of the situation was really poor, and that Boston cannot recruit a new flex player. And people were talking about making exceptions, but at the end of the day, the reality of the situation is that Boston is going to have to make it until the next signing window without a Genji player, without a Pharah player, or at least without one at the same caliber of DreamKazper. We did see mistakes try and play the Genji, but I think the word try should indicate just how well that actually ended up.
Yeah, he wasn't at the same level, but at the same time, he does have his own specialties, because he's a very good Sombra player.
Very good.
Very good. Yes. So I do think it's interesting that we're going to see a bit of a change in their style. And one of the things that I was talking about on Watchpoint, which is that I thought it was going to really dramatically affect them, as did most people. What I didn't consider, and I think retroactively I would adjust, is that the thing about the way that DreamKazper played is that a lot of the time, whether he was on the Junkrat or the Pharah or the Widowmaker, he was actually not participating in the dives, basically, unless he was on Genji. And Boston as a team is known for how well executed their dives are, and it was mostly like, DreamKazper on the Widowmaker holding an angle while the rest of his teammates dove. So what really wasn't affected was their ability, the rest of the team's ability to still go in and dive, as long as Mistakes was in the proper position. So I think I maybe overestimated the impact that losing him would have. I do think it's still going to be an issue down the line, and will require quite a few adjustments, because even though great story, they got the upset over New York this week, it's, we did see a lot more flaws in
certainly.
Their match versus Florida yesterday. So
it isn't like they lost, their in-game leader. I don't think DreamKazper was the shot caller. He was a great flex player and one of their superstar DPS. But I don't think it hurt their coordination, their team synergy. That didn't look to be in very poor form at all. If anything, the mistakes that were coming out from the Boston Uprising during their match against New York were primarily, now there were a couple macro level errors, but the vast majority of the errors that I saw when I analyzed that match between Boston Uprising and the New York were on the individual level. So Boston as a whole, they've still got some great strategies, and they're Mr. Bleeple, again, their analyst, kind of tweeted out "download complete" to Wizard and joke, but
that's just a fucking joke.
Yeah, but they did run some really good strategies that they obviously put together specifically to counter New York. So yes, they've lost one of their superstars, but there's a lot more to a team than just a superstar DPS player.
Well, also, I think we saw some more of mistakes, inconsistency in the match against Florida, because he had a couple maps where he really individually underperformed against the Mayhem. So that, I don't know. Obviously, we need a larger sample size. One upset is great and all of that, but I do think there's more to this upset than meets the eye. Because if we're going to go and really talk about this New York-Boston match, one of the things that New York was doing very well throughout Stage 2 in particular was that they were custom tailoring strategies to their opponents.
Absolutely.
And when I was casting this match, they basically ran a lot of the same strategies from the previous week and didn't make any adjustments. Mm-hmm. So if we think about the first week of Stage 3, they're running a Volskaya defense with Libero trying to play out of the side bunker on the low ground, and Florida patiently rotates around until they get the shot on it because they know where he is and they can hide the Widow on their Widow on the low ground until you find that angle and you can surprise Libero. Then the tanks jump in and they get the supports, both because Arc and Jonak are also both next to the Widowmaker. So I saw this and I clipped it and I put it before the first game on Volskaya to show how Florida rolled over New York on point A, and literally Boston did exactly the same thing and rolled over them, and New York didn't make any adjustments whatsoever. So this is I have no knowledge of this, but my theory right now, if I'm New York and knowing other esports teams who have been in similar positions, commanding positions in first place, and we're getting into Stage 3, if I had to guess, I think that probably New York's coaches are having their players practice less right now and sort of taking a breather because they are so far in first place before the playoffs. And I think it's a strategy so they don't get burnt out, because New York did not do any of the adjustments that we've seen them do in the past, basically this week at all, against either of their opponents, against Houston as well. So I'm tending to think they may have lightened up on their players' practice time and sort of gone with some cookie cutter strategies that they had in order to lighten the load off their players so they don't get burned out before real playoffs and things actually matter, because they have a lot of cushion.
Could that have happened because they did prepare strats for a DreamKazper lineup and then did not have time to readjust to face against a...
That happened on Sunday of last week, so I think they would have had time to adjust. Because they wouldn't have really started their practice for that week until after they heard about it.
Wizard Hyung does make it very clear that, put it this way, all of his excuses are based around how much time he had to prepare for an opponent. So it does sound like he doesn't feel like the team's, he accepts the result unless he's had full prep time. So here's the thing, Monty. Yes, they had enough time to prepare, but how could you even speculate what the lineup's going to look like when you've no one's ever seen this team without DreamKazper?
No, Mistakes had played a couple of.
He's played, but how are you going to know for all the maps how he's going to play?
Sure.
That's it's going to be tough to predict, especially if you're trying to not only know what they do, but then tailor your strats to that. There's 2 layers there that they're going to be incomplete. So the download for him, his fucking upload was never complete. He could never get the information to the database, could he?
I'm just saying, I didn't see any week-to-week changes from Stage 3, Week 1. And we know they were in New York for a lot of their break, which also may have put additional stress on the players because they didn't really get a lot of downtime. So I don't know. I this is purely my own conjecture. I have absolutely no evidence besides what I've seen them do to back it up. But they didn't look like the same adaptive team that we saw down the stretch in stage 2. And I have a feeling they're just lightening up their practice because they have such a massive lead right now.
Okay. Well, did the maps actually look good for Boston, in your opinion?
Yes. So one of the interesting things about this map pool is that had DreamKazper been in the lineup, I think I might have actually predicted Boston to win because the map pool was like really good for Boston. They're actually still undefeated on Volskaya. New York also only had one loss on Volskaya. So what was cool about this matchup was it looked like it was going to be like a fucking fire match because it was like New York comes in 6-1 on Volskaya. Boston comes in 6-0 on Volskaya. They're both 8-1 on Ilios. DreamKazper known for his Pharah play. New York likes to put Pine in on Ilios. Like it actually had all the a lot of trappings of like a really cool match to watch. And we got a really cool match out of it. It's just that after, we saw the DreamKazper news, it became more of a wild card. But I think certainly based on these teams' records on that map pool, Boston, it was some of Boston's best maps for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right, so Jayne, what do you think, start laying down some of the foundations here. What were the key aspects that you think allowed Boston to win this match?
So Boston's strategy, especially, it came out on Oasis in full force, but their dive composition was just so well coordinated. And New York, they rolled out on both maps into that anti-dive composition with the Orisa, the Roadhog, the Junkrat, which they've been running a lot more often and in really weird situations. And then finally the McCree. So they're running a composition which, the name of the composition is anti-dive. It's supposed to be really strong against dive. And then you have this Tracer Sombra composition. And what Boston does is they were just corralling New York into a single location, getting that flank pressure. We're not having the Tracer and the Sombra work together like we'd see more on a Horizon Lunar Colony where they operate off those two minis. You saw the tanks and the supports basically applying that frontal pressure, waiting until both of the flankers took either side, and they just absolutely collapsed and decimated the backline with incredible efficiency and timing. We saw that happen on Ilios Lighthouse. We saw it happen again on Oasis, and their dive, that's one of the things they're most known for, and it was again in full form, where their absolute dominance came out, showing the timing and execution of their dives.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And taking a look at that too, actually one of the stats, I'm going to check back in on this stat this next week, but one thing that was interesting was even before that match happened, so even before Boston won, and Boston obviously had never won or never beaten New York before that, Jonak actually dies more playing against Boston than he does against any other team, which is a testament, I think, to the Boston efficiency of the dive.
And it's not just Jonak they're shutting down. Now, Jonak is, of course, the first target that they go for every single time, but it was very apparent from the first match on Volskaya that Striker was assigned to a duelist role, where he was just trying to shut down Sabiolbi's options to flank and take out the Boston supports. So he doesn't have to kill Sabiolbi, but he'd be going on the flanks, he'd be hiding around corners, waiting to ambush Sabiolbi and make sure that he forced Sabiolbi into duel with him, which is a lot harder for Sabiolbi to win, especially if he gets the benefit of, say, the Harmony Orb, for example. Then Sabiolbi is going to really struggle to get through Striker to the backline to do what Sabiolbi likes to do and land those really juicy one clips. So it wasn't just Jonak that they were shutting down. Certainly Jonak was more of the offensive target, but Striker during the entire map was constantly forcing those duels with Sabiolbi so he couldn't have the space, and Striker was specifically looking for his flanks to keep the backline alive. So Sabiolbi had what appeared to be a really terrible, not just game, but series across all 5 of the maps. And I think that was very strongly to do with Striker's just forcing of those duels, which to me, that's probably one of the mainstays of Boston's strategy. Now, of course, we won't know, but yeah, it's not just Jonak they're shutting down, but they've put a lot of resources and thought into shutting down Sabiolbi's play as well.
And one thing that's curious about Jonak's play in particular is that when we talk about the enemy tracer, like you're saying, having an Orb of Harmony, it's very difficult for Jonak to move his Orb of Harmony around because he is so focused on right-clicking a lot of the time that he doesn't have an opportunity to swap his orb targets. So he actually does a lot less healing, not a lot, but like less healing, let's put it that way, than other Zenyatas as a result of this. He's known for his damage, not his ability to heal his team efficiently, and that's where Arc makes up for it. The thing you get with Jonak is you get basically a third DPS player putting out ridiculous damage. To put this in context, coming into this week, Jonak led the league. I'm pulling these numbers out of my head, so they're going to be approximate. He led the league in Zenyatta damage at 6,600 per 10 minutes. The next highest was Bedoshin at about 5,800. And the third highest was Shaz at 5,700. So there's an 800 damage per 10 difference between Jonak and number 2. And then there's only 100 between 2 and 3. So you see there's like this massive gap that was developing between Jonak and other players. But it does come at a cost. And that cost is he's not the most efficient at healing, which means that he's not going to necessarily be able to flip the orb around a lot. So if the enemy tracer has an orb and is dueling Saebyeolbe off somewhere, Saebyeolbe might not get the orb, or it might not be switching off, to and from him very quickly.
Okay. Like, since obviously it's one thing if someone like Seoul Dynasty loses a game in an upset. Okay, this has happened before. Even London's had a few times. But New York had only lost 2 games in any of the stages that weren't in the playoff sections, basically. So for them to get upset is a massive, massive deal. And we basically spent the last, I think, like 20 minutes of the last episode almost building them up to be like the unbeatable gods of Overwatch. Because it's how can anyone play against Jonak?
They've lost a match every stage, okay? It's not like they haven't had the 10-0.
Oh, just the one match ever. Then well, fuck
no, they've
me.
lost one match every stage. They've lost one match every stage.
A whole match, you say?
Yeah.
Well, they really need
they can still go 9-1 this stage. Just pointing that out.
It's not like they haven't shown weakness before either. They beat the Dallas Fuel 3-2. So Dallas Fuel still managed to take 2 maps off of them. So yes, like losing series, that doesn't happen very often, but losing maps is certainly not unheard of for New York.
Does this particular matchup though, like obviously they had a couple of close ones this week. Are there sort of like blueprints now for how to beat New York that are actually replicable? Like you don't have to just literally be the Boston Uprising to do it?
Well, what's interesting to me is that the 2 teams they played this week had vastly different styles. Basically, you get Boston, who's probably the best team at executing dive now that London has had their own issues. So I think at the current moment, we'd say Boston is probably the best dive team. But then they had to play against Houston, which is, with New York, a very defensive team, one of the most defensive-oriented teams, passive teams in the league. And they lost to Boston 2-3, and they beat Houston 3-2. So I think it's interesting that they played 2 close games against 2 teams with very different styles, which I think says more about New York, again, not having either, my theory, just letting their players take a little bit of a break, or the reality, the other reality, which is that they have not figured out how to adapt as well on this map pool as they had on the last one. So that could be another reasoning behind it. But I think the problem is more internal to New York, because it was their preparation, I think, that was paying off huge dividends for them in the last stage. And we just didn't see that this week, really.
Now, I didn't watch the New York-Houston game. Were they running those same generic cookie-cutter strategies during that matchup, or did they look like they had more specific preparation against the Houston Outlaws?
No. Here's the thing, is that they didn't look like they no to both. Let me explain.
Okay.
Let me explain why.
Go on. I'm interested.
Because they swapped out Libero in a lot of the later maps and put Pine in on Route 66 and stuff like that. So Pine was actually a major factor in that series, and Pine was also playing on Oasis. So, and whenever you have Pine, I think a lot of planning goes out the window, because you basically have to play around Pine's impulsive play style, where he's just going to flank around and do crazy shit. So Libero was pulled for a lot of that match. So my feeling is that they were sort of winging it and playing based on Pine's play style. Did they run Janus with Pine as well?
On
most of the maps, yes. Let me just double check.
So it seems to me from watching New York that they've been like, Janice and Mano, both very good main tanks, but Janice is a lot more aggressive. And again, almost instinctive or impulsive in much the same way that Miro is, but his playstyle seems to mesh with Pine a lot more. And we saw that again the last 2 weeks or so, where it looks to be like they're experimenting with putting Janice's, Winston more synergizing with Pine, whereas when they are playing Libero, it seems to be more with Mano.
So the thing is they put in Janice in the first 2 maps and Mano in the last 3, but it was Libero playing map 1, Pine playing Blizzard World, then Libero back in for Nepal, and then it was Pine Route 66 and Pine on Oasis.
Oh, so that formula doesn't quite hold for the Houston match. Interesting.
Yeah. So they were mixing it up quite a lot.
Being as we just saw these close games for New York, although they did obviously manage to get the win over Houston. Next week's lineup has New York playing Philadelphia Fusion and the LA Gladiators, so 2 of the top prospects of the Western teams. Is this the stage, Monty, where New York loses multiple series?
I don't think so. I think that they're going to prepare extra hard after these sort of close calls this week. I think if my theory about them taking it easy is true, they'll probably only take a couple weeks of taking it easy before throwing themselves right back into the thick of things. So I think they're going to double down on their prep and maybe realize that it's not going to be quite as easy to keep coasting in the future. And I think we'll probably see some different strategies out of them on some of these maps, and it'll start looking more like it did in stage 2 with the more custom tailored strategies to specific opponents.
You're going to have to expand a little bit more on that, because the problem is I have a good sense of the pulse of people on Reddit, Monty. I know people won't think that, because I'm like, what do you mean Reddit hates you? Oh no, I know that. Like, I actually, that's kind of part of the sickle S&M relationship I've got going on there. But no, the point I want to get to is this. I can already read the mind of the Monty hater, and he's going to go, see, like what Monty's doing here is when a Korean team loses, they just didn't try or they didn't prep properly, but then all of a sudden they're going to prep properly. And here's the thing, right? A lot of fans, this is not to diss them, they do just naively think, why don't you just prep the most for every opponent? Be a professional, you're getting paid. It's what they think, they haven't been in a team before. So expand a little bit. What do you mean by that? Why will they prep more for these games?
I think because first off, we had Wizard Young on this show. He seemed pretty pissed off that he wasn't prepared for Philadelphia last time and that they had to make those adjustments. Knowing him as a coach and knowing his attitude towards these things, he's probably frustrated after this last week, and especially going back against Philadelphia, I think that's going to be a statement game for them. I think they want to say, hey, we should have smashed these guys in the finals, but we weren't prepared for them. This is what New York prepared for Philadelphia looks like.
Okay. Right. What about, since we were talking about Boston anyway, let's talk about the other series then, because this is part of why I actually love sports and competition, Monty, is that every time anyone gets sucked into the movie version, like they're watching the Hollywood biopic based on a real story, right? Yes. That's great, but I like the moment when the movie ends and life still keeps going. So when they beat New York, it was like, see, they never needed that DreamKazper guy anyway. He was just replaceable. Like, they can do it. The power of teamwork. Good guys win out in the end. And then obviously they went against the Florida Mayhem, who, yes, are an improving team, but are nowhere near contenders for top of the league, etc. And this was a pretty, we have a saying in English, this is squeaky bomb time, Monty. This was a tough series. They might not have gotten out of this one. You like that one?
I do like that one.
So how do you go from beating the best team basically ever so far in the Overwatch League to narrowly escaping Florida Mayhem?
No.
Well, this was. Oh, go ahead.
Florida Mayhem's not the same team that they were in Stage 1. We had Zeppis as the pickup, and then we've got Saya player who has just incredible plays on Widowmaker. Absolutely ridiculous crit accuracy, really good timing and sense about when to flank. Like if we saw that flank at the end of Route 30 or third point of Route 66, he's a very impressive individual, as well as bringing on Saya player onto the Florida Mayhem frees up Logics to stick more onto that Tracer. So now they have 2 absolute top-notch DPS players on Tracer and Widowmaker respectively, probably the highest impact DPS characters in the current meta. Added that onto Awesome Guy, who I don't know much of his play personally, but comes very highly regarded The Florida mayhem of yesterday is not the same Florida mayhem of today. And going, 3-2 on them is, that's nothing to be ashamed of.
I also think that had Logic's been playing this week, that I think that Florida probably would have won this series, because we haven't seen a lot of Saya Player and Logic's together, which is just going to be really strong on a lot of the maps in the pool. So once Logic's re-enters the lineup, then I think like that's going to be another factor that's going to push them into contending with some of the better teams. But I think this is where Boston came back down to earth a bit. Now, I'm sure part of why this match was so close is that a lot of their prep for Boston probably went into New York this week and not so much to Florida, which left them a little bit more vulnerable. But even on an individual hero basis, Mistakes was really up and down in this match. So he played some amazing Sombra in this series, but as we got later on and after halftime, Saya Player just started styling on him. And there was a big difference between his performance on Sombra and then later on, like his performance on, Tracer on Junkertown and Widow on Junkertown. I don't think either of later on he wasn't really performing at the same level. So that was I believe a major difference, and I think caused some problems for them.
In the last 2 stages of the Overwatch League, I'm pretty sure you have already had more combined games missed due to illness than the history of esports. This is outrageous, Monty. It's outrageous.
Okay, so let me give you a little tip. Sick doesn't always mean sick. It could mean any reason why this player is not playing in the game. So next time you hear sick in Overwatch League, that could mean sick, but it could also mean that player doesn't want to play this week. That is homesick. Needs to go do something else. So
thought up a really sick meme, and then the depression had known he could never post it, and then he had to take personal time.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So let's put it this way: sick has meant a lot of things. Obviously,
it's just a coverall.
I can't tell you. I oftentimes know when sick means something else, but I can't say the real thing. So it just gets used as a euphemism for that player is currently unavailable for a possible infinite number of reasons.
Because put it this way, if these people are actually physically ill to the extent they can't attend the arena and play video games, I think the CDC needs to just come in like that movie fucking Outbreak, close off the whole area that the Overwatch League's taking place, and let's figure out who's patient zero and what's going on right now.
I do think that many teams, because of the length of the season and the fact that many teams do have substitutes, will pull players when they could maybe play, but maybe aren't playing at their peak, and give them time to recover, which isn't a luxury that you have in other esports. It's like, you're still going to go out there and play no matter what. So if they think that perhaps a player is sick enough that he might be worse than their sub player, then that's a reasonable decision, right? I do know for this last week, for example, Super was on San Francisco. He was actually throwing up that day. So he was legitimately too sick to play, but yeah, it doesn't always mean too sick to play. It could mean many things. So interpret as you will in the future. When you hear a player is sick, that is just something teams say.
Okay, there's not a thermometer, and then on a certain temperature, there's a person's name, and they're like, "Oh, we have to bring him in now. You've hit that height. You can't. He's better than you at this point. Listen, you're better than him normally, but at 32 degrees, he is better than you. The way we figured this calculation out. Actually, that's the sort of thing Koreans would probably figure out. They'd probably go that ham on that. I could believe that. Maybe that's secretly what London's been doing the whole time. They want 6 players who all have a body temperature that's in a certain amount, a certain mental state, and so every week they have to change it up.
And then map by map, they just have to swap people out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Developing exciting new synergies every time, or anti-synergies in the case.
So let's talk about London, actually, because since we addressed New York, and obviously, yes, they had these close games, they went 1-1, right? London is a team who has been upset. Yes, they're not on the scale of the Seoul Dynasty, who seemingly at this point can almost lose to anyone, but when you look at London overall, part of the thing that makes it frustrating, confusing, is every time you see them lose, they're still doing that thing where like everyone on London gets to play at some point in the match seemingly, and they never seem to just say, even when they're down in a series, they never seem to just say, right, well, this is the 6 and we're just going to play this because this is the real 6 and it's going to win the match and then, get us out of trouble. Like, it's one thing if you experiment in the first maps and then you change it. What do you think's going on, Monty? Has anything changed in this sense? Have we at least started
I want to know what Jayne thinks first.
Oh, okay, goodness. Again, I wish the London-Philadelphia match I'd been able to watch that, but again, that was Saturday, and I didn't get a chance to watch those. And I have been just as confused as everyone else. I've been seeing so many different comments on Twitter and Reddit trying to provide excuses or reasons as to why London is more or less sandbagging right now. Like, they're not showing the performance that everyone expects, and other than like these weird substitutions or whatnot, there's not seemingly one clear answer as to why they're underperforming. Like, yes, they went 3-0 against the Florida there on Thursday, Florida Mayhem, but they kind of had a repeat showing there of the Stage 2 finals there with a 3-2 loss against Philadelphia on Saturday. And again, I didn't get to see those matches, so I haven't been able to form more of a personal opinion on what's going wrong, but from just the sounds of everybody else commenting on Twitter and Reddit, there's no one clear glaring issue. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
I think one of their problems in the last few weeks has been that Birdring has been massively underperforming. So ever since we saw the last week of Stage 2, where he got manhandled by Carpe in the Philadelphia matches and the Widow duel, he's been really not looking like himself. And Prophet has actually stepped up massively. He mega carried them against the Florida Mayhem this week. He had just an incredible series, and he played well against Philadelphia also. But I think it's been tough because Birdring's been underperforming, which means that they want Hureg in for certain maps because Birdring is not doing very well. And as for the rest of everybody swapping out, they've also started to do swaps that we've never seen them do before. So you thought you saw a lot of swaps from London, but for example, previously, when they would swap a support, they would swap the entire support line. They'd play Hagapun and Closer together, and they'd play Bedosian and Nuss together. Well, this week, now we're seeing Bedosian and Closer together, which personally I think is probably their strongest support line. I don't know why they weren't running these two together previously, whether it was synergy or communication issues. But I think on paper, Closer is their best main support, and Bedosian is their best flex support. So I actually liked the fact that they were running these guys together this week. But again, I think it's going to take time for it to gel. But because Birdring has become less impressive in the last month or so, I think they're really scrambling to figure out how their DPS is going to operate. And now they basically had decided towards the end of Stage 1 and into Stage 2 that Prophet and Birdring were going to be playing together. And now Hureg's back in the mix right now. And now they're messing with their support line again. So it seems to me that they're still trying to figure out their identity here and what their strongest combination of players are. Because with Birdring's drop in performance, they've had to figure out they've had to, I think, make adjustments to figure out other ways to win because they were so reliant on Prophet and Birdring, like dumpstering people.
Jayne, if you had to pick a couple of players, like 2-3 players for London, to start to form, like, here's the core real lineup that when a match really matters or we have to win a map, this is who should be in. Who would you put forwards? Who should the core be for you?
I'll start with the people who I think have certainly been underperforming. I don't think that the diva players for London have been doing nearly as good of a job as some of the other star diva players in the league, and especially when we're looking at how London Spitfire basically championed the two-man dive crew between Prophet and Gesture. Yes. That's going to be the core that you absolutely need to keep for London and build around. So Prophet and Gesture, I definitely agree with Monty that Closer's Lucio, I think, is really underrated. It doesn't show in the stats, but he's really good. And I don't know why more people aren't talking about this, but his Lucio is fantastic. And Bedosian, there's been people who have arguing that he's just as good as Jonak, in different ways. Jonak is still undisputably the number one, but Bedosian in many ways is undisputably the number 2 Zen. So yes. I think
and he does it with fewer resources. He's not pocketed all the time like Jonak.
He's not built into the team composition the same way that he is kind of supported the way that NYXL supports or New York supports Jonak. So yeah, Closer and Badosin would definitely be the support lineup. And then it's tough to pick that second DPS, but probably it's going to be Birdring. Hureg has received a little bit of flack for his drop in performance. He looked so strong in Apex, but again, in the last few games from London, he's been looking a little bit weaker. So the second DPS that I'd pick for the A team from London would be Birdring. But then neither Fury nor Wuyal, or however you pronounce that, Wuyal, neither of them have looked exceptionally strong. So they've been doing, the standard acceptable fare for D.Va. But, with the style of the more two-man dive crew that London's used in the past, the D.Va play just hasn't looked exceptional. And we've seen how important this role is with people like Super coming in and, Void, who's on his way. I'm looking forward to that as well once he joins LAG. But the D.Va role is so important. I don't think it's enough to just be good on that role. If you want to have a great team, you need a great D.Va player, and I'm not sure if London has that.
I think their divas are good enough and they can get back into form. But I think that this is I think there are a couple things that are holding London back. Again, they were very reliant on Birdring's performance. Birdring has not been doing great recently. I think that if they didn't trade Rascal, that having Prophet Rascal would cover for a lot of the deficiencies right now, because
Absolutely.
I think actually that probably would push them over the top again if they had a more reliable substitute. I do think Hureg looked better this week. He did have some pretty bad games in the past, but I think he's slowly been getting back into form, but it hasn't been quickly enough and I don't know if he's even capable at his ceiling of filling Birdring's shoes. So if they had still had Rascal, I think that would be a big difference maker. And I also think an underrated aspect of London has been the map pool. So first off, they haven't been doing very well on assault maps recently. So they've been dropping or tying a lot of assault maps recently against teams like Florida that are ostensibly supposed to be way worse than them. And their other problem is that in this stage, Oasis is the tiebreaker. And currently, let me just look this up real quick. London it's their worst map by a long shot. They are 1-7 on Oasis. Wow. So if you're going to play another top team, you basically can only have one weak map in the pool. Otherwise, it gives your opponent too many other opportunities to beat you. So essentially, London can't go to map 5. If they go to map 5, they get rolled every time. So if you're also weak on assault, what this does for you is it means that you don't have a good chance of winning the first map. So you have to win all 3 other maps against the top team, or you go to Oasis and get bodied. So this map pool is actually horrific for London.
And they obviously lost Gibraltar, which was one of their best. That's not in the pool for this stage.
They are really good on escort overall. So it's not. Yes, you're absolutely right about Gibraltar. They actually they are 5-0. Yeah, they have 100% win rate on Gibraltar. But escort in general they're 24-5. So basically any escort map they've been super good at. Whether it's Route 66, they're 8-1 on Route 66 right now. Junkertown, they're 6-2. So escort maps have been great for them overall. Gibraltar, obviously. And Root, they're going to be their best ones. But yeah, and Control for them is dragged way down by how shitty their Ilios results are. And they've been somewhat lackluster recently on Assault. So I just think the map pool is having Oasis as the tiebreaker is just absolutely brutal for them. Because there's the problem is that if Oasis was in the pool like it was in stage 1 for Control, you can dodge it 50% of the time because it'll be the other Control map. The issue is when you play somebody close, you are 100% guaranteed to go to Oasis, right. And that's it. It just fucks them. So unless they can massively improve on Oasis, we're probably going to see a lot more 2-3 losses, I think.
Before we go to another team, I had more of an abstract meta question, and so I'll ask you first, Jayne.
Okay.
After the first couple of stages, where even people who themselves are very good Mercy players, like Ark from New York Excelsior, even what you can always tell when something is a bit overpowered or like badly placed in the meta is where even the people benefiting are sort of like, I don't even want to win like this, but I'm forced to, like. So when Mercy exited the pool, obviously not permanently, but it wasn't like you didn't have to have it in every game. I was like, great, right? Can't wait to see this. Why is it back?
Yeah,
how did she come back? Explain
this.
This
has kind of been the major question here. Now, it's a little bit, again, focused towards the map pool because we have a lot of maps that are heavily favoring Widowmaker, right?
Yeah.
So any sort of long...
the biggest reason.
Yes, Monty's just sitting there nodding. I think it's the largest reason why, and we looked this up. It was the Mercy pick rate right now is like 72% or something. It's low
Still
70s.
too high. We've got to get that down.
Well, too high is relative, but it's for two reasons. The first one is that we're seeing the hybrid dive compositions where we're using long-range dealers, primarily McCree and Widowmaker, because we haven't seen a lot of Soldier. It's been more because of the Sombra Tracer. Because we're seeing more Sombra Tracer, that's more heavily favoring the McCree to deal with the two flankers, threatened with the flashbang. But especially in these last couple of days, we've seen a lot more of the full dive composition. But instead of Lucio Zen, we're seeing the Mercy Zen, and the strategy of damage boosting the Genji in order to farm Dragonblade, for some reason, has become a lot more prominent in just this last week. And now, it's not just one team doing this. Goodness, I'm not going to remember the teams correctly. It was... I can't remember the exact teams. I'm just going to struggle with it. But I saw 3 different teams this week specifically running the Mercy in place of the Lucio during that full dive composition and using it very explicitly to damage boost to Genji and get those Dragon Blades a lot faster. Now, why exactly we're seeing that happen instead of the Lucio Zen, I can't quite tell you, but... First reason we're seeing so much Mercy, map pool, and it favoring characters that like being pocketed by Mercy. And the second reason is that we're seeing teams use the Mercy to farm Dragonblade a lot faster. But again, why that has become a popular strat, I have no answer for.
Yeah, the Dragonblade one is interesting. One thing that basically all the teams have done, explains the Mercy, is that even when you run dive, first off, her ultimate is still super good because you chain heal everybody for a very long time. So I think it's more. I think there's several layers to this. So one of which is if you are already in Valkyrie, you're going to be fine even if you get EMP'd. So in a rise of a Sombra meta, when you have the Lucio who can get his sound barrier entirely canceled by an EMP,
and there's something can't do anything.
Yeah, there's something to be said for having the Mercy instead because you can Valk and it lasts long enough for you to actually go into the fight. You can also reposition very well in these dives. Also, if you are playing Mercy and Zenyatta, and the Zenyatta goes into the point and uses the Transcendence. So let's say you dive in and your Winston dies, and there's a huge fight going on. Well, fortunately, you, as a Mercy, as long as you're covered by a Transcendence and getting healed, you can actually just stand in the middle of a fight and res your Winston or your DPS back up because of the healing over time from the Transcendence. So it allows you to get resurrections off in places you normally wouldn't because the Transcendence is strong enough to do that for you and provides the necessary cover.
So now we got to get Zenyatta nerfed as well.
Yeah, and there's one other reason that Mercy works really well with the Genji is that Nano Boost, of course, turns the slash dash into a one-shot. But so does Mercy Boost. Mercy Boost, if she's valking with the initial dive, Genji's slash dash combo becomes 220 enough to one-shot any squishy instead of requiring the second slash. So on top of that, if you're doing these kind of compositions where you do Valk early with the dive, Mercy can also turn the ult economy a lot heavier in your favor in the same way that Supercharger is sometimes used in order to charge the rest of the team's ult faster. The two other kind of like minor reasons, which of course would not be primary reasons to run Mercy, but are benefits of running Mercy, is turning that Dragon Blade that you helped farm into a mini Nano Blade, and then moving ult economy farther in your favor with the chain damage boost.
Mm-hmm. So I think she would... when the nerfs came in, it was clear that she was still going to be good. It was just a question of how good. And because you can run her in these dive compositions, and because you can run her with the Widowmaker, where you get free reses basically on your Widow or your Zen if they die early, it becomes that she's still really strong. She's not. My main gripe about Mercy was that it was incredibly stupid how she could get 2 instant reses in a team fight, which made it very difficult to watch and very difficult to cast. And
had no counterplay, really.
And had no counterplay. And so it made bad teams much better as a result, because it basically, as long as Mercy in stage 1 had her ultimate, she could make bad teams win team fights as long as you had the Valk and the other team didn't. So that was really disappointing.
That was analyzing games in the early match. It was like, oh, one team has Mercy or Valk, the other team doesn't. Oh, I wonder who's going to win. And then
because it was a do-over button. Like it was like, even though we suck at dive, we're going to dive in here, but you don't have Mercy ult, so you can kill us, but we're just going to come back and kill you. It's just incredibly stupid. So I'm glad that's gone. There is actually more skill to Mercy play now, and even you can see the teams adapting even now to the greater Mercy play, because you can actually interrupt her channel by displacing her. So you're seeing more like divas try and use their boosts to fuck with Mercy players who are in like res channel and try and take over and force them out of position and to waste their time.
And Pharah's concussion as well. That's a great way to interrupt from even outside of line of sight without putting yourself in danger. One conk, that res is canceled.
So it is, I think we're going to start seeing play or more Mercy counterplay, because teams have started to pick up on using these abilities or saving them to try and disrupt a resing Mercy.
Right, Monty, when the season began, there was lots of ways to spin the fact that London hadn't won a game, right? Which was like, okay, they lost to Houston. Well, probably thought Houston wasn't going to be as strong initially, messing around with the lineup still, experimental, preparing for New York at the end of the week.
They also like have a really bad record against Houston. Houston is responsible for like half of London's. Actually, they're like 3-0 in the actual regular season against.
So you have that one,
London.
right? There's game 1. Okay, then you have game 2. It's New York Excelsior. You know, they're the best team. That's fine. Come into game 3. Okay, we get the win finally. Beat Florida Mayhem. Lose to Philly. So they're now 1-3. So you think, no problem. Schedule will just, probably had a hard start to the split. But next week they play Boston and then they play the Valiant. So the question is this, Monty. Are they actually going to have a winning week in week 3? Because if they don't, that'll be 3 weeks in a row without a winning week.
I think they're going to 2-0 this week.
They're going to 2-0. Are you confident they're coming back?
I'm confident they're gonna figure it out and come back. Well, actually, let me take a look at the map. Well, again, the Oasis problem is so bad for them that I don't know. Okay, I believe they can 3-1 Boston, because Boston is actually quite bad at Numbani. And they don't have DreamKazper for Ilios, and I think London town. So they'll lose Anubis. Boston is still they're really good at Assault. But it's either going to go 3-1 London or 3-2 Boston. Because London will lose Anubis to them, and then they will lose Oasis if they have to play. But I think they'll win the other maps. And then their other against Valiant. Yeah, I think they'll 3-1 Valiant. That's probably more likely than them 3-1ing Boston. Boston could be a 3-2 to Boston, I think. But Valiant, I think, are just massively overrated right now, because
they've had a pretty easy schedule, to be fair.
They've had a super easy schedule, and they played against Seoul, who's struggling, and they played against a Seoul who was playing like Guido and Gambler. And they didn't play Zunba that match. They played Zephyr as well, because I think Zunba had like
that was the joke.
Or something.
That was the setup to the joke with Costa, remember?
Yes.
So we are aware of that, yes, entirely. Right, okay, so then why don't we talk about Seoul then? So Seoul had a close game against Dallas, and then after that, they lost to Gladiators, who obviously has been one of the better teams. Jayne, what do you think of the Seoul Dynasty? Because like as much problems as London has had, okay, still a very good team generally. Yes, it's unexpected to see New York lose, even though, as you say, yes, they have lost maps before. But Seoul, every stage it's like this. They always have problems. So What do you make of the Seoul Dynasty? I mean, they're not the problem they have is they're a team that's never really had it like fully rolling and locked in, and you knew they were really, an elite level team consistently. So, has it gotten worse? Is it still more the same? What's your take on Seoul Dynasty?
It's actually kind of funny because I was streaming earlier today, and Sideshow was a guest on the stream with me, and this is exactly
nice of him to show up to do content with people.
Yes, indeed, it was pretty nice having him on to analyze the match. Yeah,
for some.
For those of you who don't know, he was supposed to be here today, but had to cancel. But anyway, so we were trying to look between the two of us. We were looking at the matches between the Seoul Dynasty against the Dallas Fuel. We specifically looked at that Route 66 match where Dallas had such a stellar hold on the second point to 3-1 them on Route 66. And then we were looking at the Blizzard World map between the Seoul Dynasty and the Los Angeles Gladiators. So there's, again, and I referenced it earlier, very, very early in this segment, how we're not quite sure if it's like a coaching staff decision or some sort of player decision, but they're kind of, the characters that they're picking, it seems like they would rather have, fewer weaknesses than having some of their flex players playing their strongest heroes. And on top of that, we were looking specifically at Miro's play style. And again, Miro, known for more or less revolutionizing the Winston play style very early on. Yeah. And we're thinking about, has he kind of evolved? Is he, playing with his old habits? And he's known or referred to as more of an instinctual player. So we were kind of trying to look and take apart Miro's Winston plays, because that is what Sideshow himself thinks is one of the primary issues with the Seoul Dynasty. Now, we weren't conclusive in our decisions or the analysis after we went through the maps, but what a lot of other teams doing is having their Winston kind of like hiding on a flank, ready to counter dive, ready to dive if they do get a flanker in position. They're staying out of sight, out of mind, not taking poke, preserving their cooldowns, being a lot more kind of cautious and tactical. Whereas Miro uses his cooldowns very aggressively, holds a lot farther ahead, where other teams would kind of like let the enemy get distance before engaging. In the same way, unlike King's Row A, for example, it's better to give up a tick than try and fight to prevent them to have any tick and then lose the fight entirely. So Miro with a very aggressive hold and is burning cooldowns in either to retreat or to stabilize, and the other teams are capitalizing on this. So I do think after watching today, Miro has some weaknesses that he needs to correct, but there are some really weird compositional picks in both like the players that they're fielding. Again, Zumba I think had an injury, was it? But Zumba definitely I think the superior off tank to Zephyr, and then
by a lot.
By a lot, that yes. And they traditionally struggled against Houston Outlaws and specifically the Junkrat. So now we're seeing a lot more Junkrat play out of Seoul Dynasty, out of Wikid. But we're seeing them play this Junkrat, and they're just not getting the same value out of it. Like I forget this was a discussion on Reddit this week, how the Riptire, for example, has the highest win percentage of team fights per ult used, and it was like 70% of the time that a team uses the Riptire, they win the team fight. I'm pretty sure Seoul Dynasty was responsible for the other 30%.
Okay.
So they're like Rakid, especially in their match against Striker. Was
Dallas?
It
Boston?
Boston,
No.
Right? Okay. No.
I don't remember which match I'm thinking of,
and,
but
yeah. Okay.
last week. Let me find the exact.
Right.
But it was.
They played
we're looking
Valiant and Shock, maybe.
I don't remember. I wanted to say Libero, but they didn't play them last week, so I'm remembering incorrectly. But there was many times in which, in the Junkrat matchup, when they played on Junkertown, Wikid just looked straight up outclassed on Junkrat. He was not getting enough effect out of it. So yeah, like Seoul seems to have struggled against Junkrat in the past, and they're trying to run him more often in this past week, and they're just not getting the same value out of him or success out of him as other teams.
Well, part of the loss too. So I agree with Miro, and one of the issues that they've been having is that Miro goes too far out, which means that the other teams can just dive a lot of the time Jae-Hong and Toby, or their support line, and towards the end of stage 2, they would just die first in basically every engagement. They got absolutely wrecked at the end of that stage. Now, we had some issues with Zunba playing, and then Fleta against the Gladiators played one map and then was sick and taken out for the rest of the series. So I think that's a match that Seoul wins if Fleta is actually able, their star player, their most consistent performer right now, is able to play the rest of the time, because it was Munchkin on Widowmaker a lot of the time as a result, and it just obviously wasn't ideal. So I'm not, without they looked a lot better earlier in this week without Fleta. Now I don't read too much into the Gladiator match, and I think this was actually like a real sick thing, because he was pulled after one map, and they said on the broadcast, I think, that he had seen the nurse that was on site or something. So I do think that was a real sick, as opposed to the euphemism of sick.
This isn't some sort of fucking anime show where they're all like, "Oh, I need to see the nurse," and she's just some beautiful woman or something, or some comedic skit. Like, "Oh,
I didn't take you for an anime fan, Thorin."
Exactly, I'm not Thorin, mate, don't worry. So that's why I talk about it in such demeaning terms, right? What about this then? So people obviously have already speculated so much about Seoul Dynasty and the different million different things the coaching staff has seemingly tried to implement with this team. And this is obviously one of the components of their squad, which is that it's not like this is just the people who ran Lunatic High and it's business as usual, Going forwards, you can only have so long where you're inconsistent in air quotes, and you have these same issues. Isn't this kind of just who Seoul Dynasty is going to be from now on, Monty? I mean, what hope is there that things get much better soon?
I think they'll be a playoff caliber team. I think they'll maintain.
Not that they changed the fucking playoffs.
Yeah, I think they'll still be. I still think they'll be in. In the end, top 6 teams. Sorry, I talked about
at the end of the season.
Yeah, I still think they're going to sit at 3rd or 4th place. They'll probably struggle still against the.
But they don't look like they're going to number 1, do they?
No. I don't think anybody's going to say, yes, this team is going to number 1. There have been a lot of rumors, however, about the signing of Cox, the former flex support and primary shot caller from Runaway. That is something that could actually help them a lot.
When could they sign him, though? It'd have to be after the stage or something?
So what happens is the signing window is already closed. So it closed on April 3rd, but it takes time for the league to clear players.
So it could have already gone on in behind the scenes and it just hasn't been confirmed yet.
Well, it would have had to have already been submitted, is what I'm saying.
It just might not have been publicized yet. Exactly.
They could be doing some, I don't know. There are a lot of reasons. It takes time to look into the players' backgrounds and stuff like that. Make sure that legally everything's on the on the up and up before they
check if any of them haven't boosted.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Now, have you heard that the Korean casters and whatnot are refusing to say Sato and OG's name?
That is, I read that. If that is true, then that I think is complete bullshit. You can't pander to the audience in such a way as a commentator, and I think that is literally unprofessional of them. It is your job to talk about the players. You are not responsible for the league's decisions to include these boosters. But as a caster, say the fucking players' names. Don't pander to Inven or whoever is criticizing you on these players on social media. They are in the league. The fans can get over it. That's the decision that has been made by the league itself. If you can't say the player's name because you disagree with the fact that they are there and they were previously boosting, if you have such a giant ethical problem with it, quit your job as a caster. Say the players' damn names or quit. I don't want to hear it. My mind was blown at the commentator when I heard.
Sadly, though, I have this isn't exactly something that comes out of isolation. Like, first of all, the Korean scene is incredibly vindictive if you do something that's perceived to be wrong. Like probably the best examples ever are the players who literally got banned for match fixing. Like, for anyone who doesn't know, 2 players in StarCraft Brood War, there was one, he was a very famous Zerg player, and then who knows why this had to be the same story, but there was an amazing Zerg player in StarCraft 2, and both of these guys, it turned out, were match fixers, right? So after they were banned for match fixing, as opposed to just saying, right, they were banned, wow, they'll never play again, you know, disappointed, blah, blah, whatever else. No, they literally, like 1984 style, have written them out of history. And if you go to the OGN Stadium, Savior, the player in Brood War, who won, I think it was like the Shinhan Bank Season 3 or something, right? No, he never. No one won that one. That's actually a blank portrait and nobody won that tournament. It says his name, but
the portrait is gone. Yeah. It just has a Star League logo.
He's not allowed to have won that now. And likewise with a player Life in StarCraft 2, again, he never won. He never existed. There was no Life.
Yeah, but you might think to yourself, hey, that's just the Koreans doing that. So at BlizzCon this last year, I was walking by the StarCraft and they have banners of all the BlizzCon winners, the StarCraft winners.
Yeah, he won one of those as well, yeah.
So it's not even that his picture was taken out, and they have like what was it, like 2014, I think, was the year he won? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it must be 2008 or something, surely.
No, 2014 for Life.
Oh, Life, yes, I think that could be right, yeah.
I think it was 2013 or 2014. So instead of just having like Life and then like no portrait there, right, like they did in the OSL like Hall of Fame, they just literally don't have a portrait. It goes from like 2012 to 2014. There's no banner. There's just nothing. It's like, well, we just deleted him straight up.
Now,
Fisher just come up with, come on.
And now Fisher this week, I'm not sure if you guys were following the drama, but Fisher was very publicly going after OG for boosting and held a poll between his English-speaking fans and his Korean-speaking fans to think about, or asking people what they thought the biggest issue facing ranked or competitive Overwatch was. And North Americans, the very large majority, said that it was one tricks. Yes. And then the Koreans, in overwhelming majority, said that it was boosters. Is this a cultural thing? Is there other reasons, Monty? You might have some insight?
Yeah, so there are going to be a lot more boosters in Korea. I think the biggest problem is that because in competitive titles, because this was a huge problem in League of Legends too, which is that people who, when a game is very popular in Korea, it becomes somewhat of a social status thing to have a certain rank in that game. So boosting, as a result, is significantly more rampant because they're a very competitive culture, and part of the things you want to do is show off to your friends that you're a higher rank, so you will purchase more. They just sell a lot more boosting. There's a lot more boosting services. You're less likely to encounter one tricks because Koreans are very collectivistic in terms of culture. So one tricking would be something that would be seen as very selfish to do. And the social pressure would be huge not to do that. So there's not really an attitude of, I'm going to play this fucking hero, fuck you. It's like people want to win the game. So most people, obviously this is very broad generalizations, but if you were a high level player in Korea, the main goal is to increase your rank. Right? People want to go up in the ladder. They're not playing competitive because they want to one trick a hero and get, just do what they want to do, fuck everybody else, right? So that also feeds into the fact, that also explains why they have more boosters and pay for that boosting service, because there's a desire to increase in rank rather than selfishly have fun. In the States, people just tell you to go fuck yourself in competitive. They're going to play Symmetra attack no matter what, and that's that.
Plus, they're also just two different solutions to the same problem. Like, aren't you good at the game? Can't you do all the things? Do the one thing you're good at over and over again. Try and get as high a rank as you can. Aren't you good at the game? Can't you do everything? Just pay someone else to get you that. It basically depends how lazy you are. Do you want to get really good at one, or giving people money to be good at a lot? So I do think that that's reasonable, and I understand why the Korean fans are mad about the boosting. I get it. No, but it's the way that they were doing it here, Monty. Like he says, the drama was hilarious because the way these guys address each other is it's like they have just all read novels from like the Victorian era, and like, sir, you have dishonored your house. You will not address me in public if I see you again. Like, it's like the level of drama in even how they tweet to each other is so unreal, man.
I do like how it seems like the mantra is like death before boosting.
It's unreal, isn't it?
Yeah.
They believe that it should be some sort of career capital punishment where you should never be able to play a game. I think OG boosted for like, a couple $100 maybe. Asada was much worse.
He's got that scarlet letter on him, though, hasn't he? So it's over for him.
But they don't look at context. They think that if you're boosting. But their anger is understood given the situation on the Korean ladder. Their solution of trying to erase even the casters, trying to erase these players from the game is ridiculous. Like, what the hell is that? I think you should just hold Blizzard more accountable to dealing with account boosting across all regions, but especially in Korea. That's who you should be mad at, not the players.
Now, that's an interesting, you were talking about, the more social status for boosting and whatnot. And that's the reason it's so prevalent in Korea. And I'm not very familiar with the Korean scene or Korean culture or anything like that. But in my personal experience, and I have had a few friends who have done boosting in the past, and my opinion of it, just from the people who I knew who partook in those type of activities, the main reason that the boosters themselves did it is because of the lack of a formal tier 2 scene or any way for them to actually make money and support themselves while they're trying to actually make it into the Overwatch League.
Absolutely.
So, there's people, I don't remember which player it was. I believe it was iRemix, but I could be quoting wrong, who when he got signed had like $80 to his name.
No, it's Bishu.
Bishu, thank you. And so this is kind of like my perspective is that I feel, or at least in the North American culture, boosting would be reduced if there was, you can't boost unless you're a really good player. Like, nobody makes money boosting to Diamond. Nobody makes money boosting to Masters. Nobody makes money boosting to GM.
You know what he's going to do right now,
the top 500 boosting contracts.
This is where Jayne's going to make a mad pivot and suggest that Blizzard themselves implement universal basic income to remove boosting in their games.
900 IQ socialism.
Exactly. That would be pretty next level, right? That would be a way to get the kids on board. Like, look, you want to get rid of boosters and one tricks?
But yeah, do you
pay everyone a living wage?
We talked about this in a previous episode. Oftentimes, the people who are pro players are less financially well off in terms of their families, and often in Korea, many of the top players. They're pro players because they don't have any other skills and they dropped out of high school and all this other stuff. And their families are oftentimes, obviously, there's a wide range. Some of them come from wealthy backgrounds, but many of them, more than you might suspect, are like supporting their parents and their siblings off of their professional income, which also means that they practice harder because they have way more to lose than a lot of the Western players. But the other side of this is that remember that we didn't have Overwatch League for these players to play in, and nobody was willing to invest money in Overwatch, basically, or very few organizations, because last year in 2016, 2017, because people knew Overwatch League was coming. So what the fuck is the point of putting money into it if we're going to have to buy into a franchise and we'll just wait for that to happen? Absolutely. Or why would we invest a lot of money in players when we're not going to get a slot and we're just fucked? So during that period, I do think that there were a lot of, probably more than we know, Korean pros that were boosting to make ends meet, to feed themselves during that time. But part of that criticism, sure, we can say, wow, they shouldn't have done that, and sure, they shouldn't have. But I think part of the criticism does have to be directed at Blizzard to say, you created a professional scene that was in limbo for a year and a half after the game's launch, and then now you have to provide a robust tier 2 contender structure so that these players can actually make more money doing that than they would boosting, right? Because otherwise they're just going to keep boosting.
Absolutely. Like, if you remember, like, I forget what the reward is for winning the Open Division in Korea, but last year when I was competing in the Open Division, the prize for having competed for like 7-8 weeks, both weekends, all the scrims and whatnot, first place prize out of the 100 or so teams that participated was $50. Yeah, like that's the.
Don't spend it all at once.
Don't spend.
That is sort of the tier
balance too.
That is sort of the tier 3 scene, and I think that most of the players that are in top 500, especially since we have like 140 professional players in North America right now. So on the North American server, they're taking out probably at least 200, given their Smurfs and shit, of the top 500 accounts. I would just wager, and then the contender scene is taking out many more. So I think we can say that the majority of top 500 players are in fact professional players, or like OWL players or contenders players in NA right now.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like, so what you're saying is, sure, like that's shitty, but I think most of the top 500 players at least have some sort of income based on the game right now through pro contenders or
yes.
Yeah, but that's also the problem, Monty. They do now, but as we're saying, there was like a year where
that's why I think the old boosting stuff should be forgiven.
There should be an amnesty, Monty. If you come forwards now and say that you boosted, there should be an amnesty. You should be allowed to live your life, and we'll forget about it. But if you don't, then Koreans will be really salty for you forever. There we go. That's the punishment.
Condemned to be forever just harassed on Twitter by Koreans.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you are indeed Korean, that's actually a big deal. If they were just mad at me forever, I'd go, fair play, whatever. Didn't you all elect a cannibal or something? I can't remember that story. Something like that. Some match. I believe it was just someone that they knew. Right, back into the Overwatch League. So a team that has obviously lit the Overwatch League on fire is the Philadelphia Fusion, thanks to the amazing performance they had in Stage 2. And then they obviously had this situation where the other bane of the Overwatch League, aside from illnesses real or imagined or claimed, is obviously suspensions. And just when everyone's like, I can't wait to watch the Philadelphia Fusion. All right, that guy who everyone was thinking was the MVP's out. Right, cool. Well, he's back now, Monty. EQO is back. And as much as he's still a very good player, the real storyline of Stage 3 has been Snillo, right? Every single game, awesome. This guy seems to go nuts. Like, we talked a couple of episodes back about how every team needs a tracer, etc. Apparently, this is just what the doctor ordered because he's killing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, he's doing great. I think that he's been just such a fantastic addition for this map pool, too, when they want to run so many of the Widow Tracer compositions. And Carpe's been doing amazing work on the Widowmaker. Seems like a very natural fit for them, and they did lose one of their matches while EQO was out, and I do think that EQO is very important to this team still because he provides so much flexibility. He did look a little bit rusty, which I think is understandable against London, but they still pulled out the win. And I think now that you have EQO and Snillo, you can start subbing these guys in and out, as we saw towards the end of Stage 2. They should be very strong going forward. And also, Philly has, they won against London, they won against Houston, they lost a close one to Boston, but a lot of their hardest matches for Stage 3 are out of the way already. Sure, they still have to play against New York. Sure, they still have to play against, like the Valiant, potentially, if they're actually good and not just looking good because of their weak schedule. Sure, they still have to play against Seoul, but a lot of their hard matches are now behind.
Okay. What do you think about Philadelphia generally, the addition of Snillo? Jayne, come on.
I hadn't seen Snillo play until the Stage 2 playoffs there, but he really came, and showed himself and showed how good he is. And in the same way that Florida Mayhem is going to be a lot more of a force to be reckoned with because they have Logix and Sia player who can pick up the Tracer and Widowmaker, we're having this same sort of thing with Fusion, where Snillo just being a monster on that Tracer, and Carpe can focus more on the Widowmaker, who is, again, probably in contention for the best Widowmaker in the league. Many people have been voting for Carpe to be basically the league's MVP. The guy is...
He's definitely in contention.
Yeah. So Boston is the only other team who, again, previously to DreamKazper's termination, had such a well-balanced DPS roster. We're having... The Boston crew has like a really good, balance of characters themselves. Whereas now with mistakes on the playing more that flex role, his Genji is a little bit weaker. Both Philadelphia Fusion, they've got that Widowmaker in Carpe. They have the Tracer for Snillo, EQO running the Genji, and Shadowburn, of course, can do the Genji. They've favored EQO's more aggressive playstyle to Shadowburn's more passive Genji playstyle. But Shadowburn has a Pharah that's not to be laughed at. So the flexibility as well as the DPS lineup of Fusion to fit into the current meta, as well as any meta I really see coming in the future is going to give them a real step up, and I think they're going to be a top 3 team going into the playoffs.
It's hard to imagine how they wouldn't be. And also, as Stage 3 winds down, they're going to have access to Sato for Stage
Absolutely.
4. And he's never played a professional game, but from all the reports I hear of people who are playing against Philadelphia's second roster, because remember that because they actually do the 12-man system very intelligently. So oftentimes they'll split up into 2 groups for whatever map. Of course, they'll scrim each other, but they'll send one of their coaches to each group and then coach those guys independently of each other. And so they're not only scrimming against each other, their second roster is consistently scrimming against other Overwatch League or Contenders teams as well. So there are a lot of people who have played against Philly's like B team that have played against Sato who say he's really fucking good. So I'm going to be really excited to see how strong he looks coming out in Stage 4.
Yeah, and Fraggy's definitely been someone who I've mentioned in the past as being what I consider to be the Fusion's weak link in their composition.
He's gotten a lot better recently.
Exactly. His Winston has been weaker. His Reinhardt has always been strong, but he's been getting stronger across the board. And, I'm sure the coaching staff has a lot to do with Fraggy picking up his game, but especially bringing in Sato, who I feel is superior on Winston, and Fraggy getting a lot stronger on that Reinhardt. We're patching only really the one glaring weakness that I feel like the Philadelphia Fusion had.
Well, I saw that actually Sideshow said on Twitter, since he didn't bother turning up, we'll pretend he was by his Twitter.
Perfect.
So I remember he said...
That's your best Sideshow impression.
He said, he actually... Well,
and let this be a lesson to you. If you don't come, we will throw the bus.
Exactly. No, he's just like a booster now. We won't even refer to his name anymore. Just whoever was going to appear on this show, that guy like from the northeast of England, whoever he is, he who shall not be named, right? So he actually made a comment where his theory on it was in line with what you're saying. That part of, I think, why he thought Fraggy didn't look as good before was because it was Carpe who was playing the Tracer. And he actually thinks that like Snillo coming into the team in some way is like playing a role in the dynamic of why Fraggy's opened up his game. Because obviously Carpe is playing fantastic on a different role, and they've got Snillo in there. So I actually, what was his tweet? I'll see if I can find the last bit of it. And
I didn't even consider that there'd be different synergy between Carpe and Snillo.
Here was the tweet. I found
Fraggy.
It now.
Okay.
It says, Fraggy and Snillo sync up so well, and this duo between a Tracer and a Winston was never present when Carpe played Tracer. Philly signed playstyle replacements for Shadowburn and Carpe rather than players with different hero pools, and it's awesome to see it work out. Sideshow's theories.
That's not an angle I'd considered, but I can't refute it with looking over their plays with that theory in mind. Seems sound.
Exactly. We don't even need the guy on the show. We've got access to his Twitter. fuck whoever that is.
I feel like Monty's looking up stats.
No, I don't have any stats to back that up right now. But I think it is an interesting theory, and yeah, it does make...
He's just looking up Brent's Twitter for a counter, but there was nothing on there.
Snillo has a very different play style than
Very
Carpe,
different, yes.
and basically than any other Tracer, because of the amount of times he spends like lurking and hiding and patiently waiting for opportunities. I personally think that I'll watch out for that. My biggest takeaway was that Fraggy has basically just been spending most of his time ever since late Stage 2 covering supports now and jumping back and counter diving as opposed to initiating dives. And I think that's probably the single biggest thing that's changed.
Okay. Right, well, now that they've added EQO back in, Monty, now that Carpe just went ham this week, and they've got Fraggies even on board, Snillo's going off, do you think the Philadelphia Fusion could actually win the stage?
I think they have the tools. Once EQO gets back up to speed, I will be quite interested to see how their match goes against New York next week, because I think that's going to be telling as to what their current strengths are. They should have more of an opportunity to reintegrate EQO into the lineup. The map pool for New York, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I do think it is in favor of New York overall. But we'll wait and see what their level is in that match when they're not playing London, who I think is slumping right now.
Okay, so to go to another of the teams that has had some pretty good games is the Gladiators. So Jayne, what do you think of the Gladiators team? Because I know in the last episode we were kind of talking about the fact that obviously their team was massively pushed to a higher level when they got Fisher into the team, and he was looking amazing. Everything was going so well, but it did seem as though teams learned how to play against that and kind of adapted to it. And it's still good, but they weren't like, the runaway clear, like, yeah, they're going to be the best Western team, not hands down, etc. What do you think of the Gladiators at the moment?
Well, and this week Asher was in Korea, was he not?
Yes, there was.
Yeah,
something
so
like
Surefour was covering on the tracer role, which he definitely prefers the the longer range hit scans, the McCrees and the Widowmakers and whatnot. So Surefour put out that tweet that he was a bit struggling for him to cover for Asher, but I think they've been doing really well. And LAG has been kind of one of those teams, kind of in the back of my mind, trying to figure out why just switching out Fisher. I remix for Fisher made the Gladiators go from bottom half team to a team that's looking really strong and putting up some really decent numbers here. And again, another topic that I was talking about, Sideshow, so I'll bring his opinion into the mix here, is that Fisher is, there's not really any sort of debate between he is a superior Winston player, but what Sideshow thinks is that that Fisher has basically taught the Los Angeles Gladiators how to dive, because on his previous team he was the shot caller and whatnot. And although like Deepe and Los Angeles Gladiators, I'm sure the coaching staff, they've been doing some really good strategies. They've had those really awesome compositional picks. Most notably that crazy composition we saw come out on Ilios Ruins. Mm-hmm. We've seen kind of that sort of strategizing come out from the Los Angeles Gladiators and be really, really good. But I think Fisher's ability to kind of, grab the rest of the Gladiators by the collar and kind of like drag them across the route of properly playing dive has been one of the biggest impacts to making the Los Angeles Gladiators a better team. Their dive.
I think it's even simpler than that. I think that Asher and Fisher being able to speak the same language and coordinate Tracer Winston dives is probably the biggest reason in and of itself.
Absolutely,
because the timing on that has to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about in the current meta where the 2-man dive can be just as effective as a 4-man dive if used properly, having Asher and Fisher no language barrier between the two, I'm sure certainly helps. But it's more than just those two participating in these dives that are looking a lot cleaner than they did during stage 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
What is the trajectory then for LA Gladiators?
With seeing Void come in, Void replacing Bishu. Bishu is another one of those, like we mentioned it earlier when we were talking about London Spitfire, but if you want to be a great team, you need a great diva player, and I've got high hopes for Void to be, doing the same thing that Fisher did with replacing iRemix. I hope that Void replacing Bishu, despite, Bishu being Canadian, I got to cheer for my boy. You can't undersell how much a diva upgrade can really do for a team, and that's going to be another one of the things that I had previously considered to be Los Angeles Gladiators' largest weaknesses being patched. Same with Fusion getting their weakness patched by having Sato come into play on the Winston. So I only see an upwards trajectory for the Gladiators. Is it going to be more upwards and faster than the other teams like the Fusion? I don't think the Gladiators are going to overtake the Fusion. But I can see them being 4th, 3rd. It might be a stretch, but I could see them being in 4th place going into the playoffs.
Okay.
The stage playoffs?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
stage playoffs.
my problem with the Gladiators right now is that I think they're getting figured out, and the focus on Fissure, it's not a good patch to be a Winston that relies on Primal Rage because you just get hacked during it by Sombra. So it's become much harder to make big Winston plays where you're well away from the rest of your team, like we're used to seeing players like Muma and Fissure do. So also, I think we have to consider the fact that Gladiators have already lost to the San Francisco Shock, and they played pretty close against Dallas. So their win against Seoul is great. Again, they didn't have Asher, but Seoul didn't have Fleta, and I think it's more important that Seoul has Fleta, who's their top performing player, than Gladiators having Asher. And then they won against the Shanghai Dragons. So I guess I don't I think it's going to be a stretch for them because they've had a soft schedule and they already lost to the Shock to actually make playoffs this time, because I think they're going to be dealt a couple more losses. They'll probably lose both of their matches next week, if I had to guess, against the Valiant and New York, and I think they will come back down to earth. I think this team is going to be a 50% team like they are right now, maybe slightly better. And I think they'll miss the overall playoffs for the league.
Right. What about the San Francisco Shock? The much vaunted team who obviously have been able to get these young guns into the team. Admittedly, one of their wins was against Shanghai Dragons, but they played against Valiant, 4-0'd. Monty, this was literally... all the chips were in on this, mate. I know they still, in theory, have to wait for like Architect to get there right, but it was supposed to be...
Look, I think this team...
the good times, mate. We're supposed to
I think this team has gotten a lot
the sun's
better.
Out. Okay.
I do really question some of the coaching decisions that they've made. So
like
against the Valiant, they put an Architect. Okay, it's Architect's first match. What do they have Architect do? Kid literally can't speak English. They just put him in and they make him play Sombra. And it's like, why would you do that? He can't communicate. You need to communicate when you're playing Sombra. It's like one of the most communication heavy heroes because you have to know who's getting hacked, what angle you're coming in at for the EMP, where your positioning is, trying to get the hack in the first place so the rest of the team can respond. You have Dante. Dante's probably the best Sombra player in the league right now. Him or Rascal, most certainly. And you're going to have Architect play Sombra? Like, you didn't even bring him in here for this. Like, what the fuck are you doing? I was tilting while I was casting that game because I was so excited to see Architect. And then I just see him playing Sombra, and I'm thinking to myself, you have Dante. You don't need to do this to Architect. Architect was not intended to fill this role for you guys. Stop it. So I don't know. Like, I hope they can integrate Architect better. I think they would have done better against the Valiant had they just run Dante in that position instead, who's been outstanding. This is... in time, I think it'll work out. Things got a little bit hairy against the Shanghai Dragons, and anything... the match against Shanghai showed how important Super shot calling is to San Francisco Shock, because without Super, they looked just as confused in terms of their coordination as they did before Super turned 18. So Super was very sick apparently that day and couldn't play, but my God, did their coordination go down the shitter against the Shanghai Dragons. I think they can still take some upsets. They came out strong against the Gladiators. Once they integrate Architect, I think they'll be in a much better place.
Okay. What did you actually think of Architect in the Shanghai Dragons game? If this is the real Architect as he's supposed to be, play what you'd expect, flex, whatever, Widowmaker. What else was he on? Farah, right?
Yeah, I think he did great. Architect on an individual level when he was not on Sombra, pretty good, especially in the Shanghai game. He was taking over some of those games toward the end of the series.
Okay. What do you actually think of the Shock overall then, Jayne?
I think the Shock are definitely improving. They've recently got Sinatra, and Sinatra's kind of debut got memed a little bit on Reddit, but he's been looking better, getting back into the hang of playing competitive with the team. And I think Moth and Architect are definitely improvements. Super, a massive improvement. And again, like Monty was referring to, is not just a great diva, but a great in-game leader. So without him, they definitely look a lot more coordinated. And some of the numbers that man has been putting up on Diva are just ridiculous, like 72-4. And I don't remember which game that was. Was it against the Shanghai Dragons? But yeah, like over 70 limbs and single-digit deaths. So absolutely just superb Diva play. Is it enough of an improvement to make them like a top half team? No, I don't think it is. It's and maybe it's kind of like we've got the Los Angeles Valiant syndrome where they've made so many changes recently. They just really haven't had a chance to, practice it out, find themselves, feel comfortable as a team, find their signature. So I think they're, again, on the upwards trajectory, but is that upwards trajectory of improvement going to be faster than the other teams around their level that are improving? That's yet to be seen.
Because here's the thing that's really rough right now is if you're the Shock, Like, here's the thing. I get why you guys are like soft selling it. Like, you know, they've just, like, for example, Sinatra hasn't played, so fair enough. Yeah, you take time. You got to give the guy a bit of chance to get into the game. These are new lineups they're running. They had a player sick. Okay, these are all totally valid reasons. The problem is, if you're the Shock, you basically sort of wasted the first two stages. Like, no, don't worry. Once I get these players, everything will be great. You've made all these signings. You've changed like half the roster pretty much of what the starting roster can be. And now you're like, cool, I'm ready to play. And it's like, oh, bad news, by the way. Like half the league got better in the meantime, and there's almost no free wins, and you've only basically got Shanghai Dragons, who you've already played, and even Florida Mayhem's better. Like, Houston Outlaws can still beat some teams. Dallas Fuel's not as appalling as they used to be. Then after that, everyone's a killer, and it's a massive scramble to see who makes the playoffs. So good luck. You have to basically just start winning like 75% of games.
They did beat the Gladiators, so I think it does show that they can beat teams that are ahead of them in the standings at the very least.
But it takes a lot now to win games, is my point, you know.
It does.
There's no like free wins anymore, it feels like, except for Shanghai Dragons.
Yeah, except for Shanghai Dragons. Now, this isn't going to be just a question that we're going to have to be asking of like the San Francisco Shock, the Gladiators, the Valiant. Are these guys, you know, improving fast enough to match up with the guys who are in contention for those top playoff spots?
With the Florida Mayhem, like, yes, they've improved, but it won't matter if they've improved and they're just going to be the, you know, 9th best team or something. That won't really matter.
And like, when we're talking about the overall playoffs, there's not a lot that we can do for the teams who just didn't get their, you know, their stuff in order for the first stage or the second stage, or, you know, Shanghai Dragon the third and fourth stage. But this is a problem we're not going to stop seeing in the league, especially once we're looking to get the expansions. Now, I think the rumors say that we're looking to see 4 expanded teams for next season, and we're expanding up to like 28 teams overall, I think Nate Nanzer said. How are those teams, once they get incorporated in the league, going to be... Now, Monty's frowning. He's going to be...
I think they said six more for next season.
Okay.
But I think given the success of the league, I personally would be surprised if it wasn't like 8. Just because I think there are going to be a lot of people having seen the success of the league. Now, I think they said, no, I don't have any information that, they're actually going to take 8. I just suspect, based on the success and based on the number of people that I think will be showing interest, there'll probably be 8 people that they would want to integrate. It just depends on like the regions too, because they've already said that they want 6 and they're going heavily after Europe and Asia. So we'll see.
Yes. So for those 6 teams or 8 teams or however many expand into next season, is there the talent pool currently unsigned to form rosters, ignoring Element, Mystic, and 7? Let's ignore some of the really high tier teams, because 2 teams does not 6 make. So is there enough unsigned talent to not only compete against the Overwatch League, but, you know, to develop into a team that is capable? Or are these kind of like brand new orgs that are going to form a team? Are they going to be really hyped and then just underperform? Because we've seen, you know, even New York, a team who is consistently been one of the best teams in the league, they have been making improvements over the last 3 stages. So like,
I think there will be
sitting on their laurels. So I'm worried about these kind of expansion teams.
There's a lot of Koreans. Don't worry.
There's a lot of Koreans. Don't worry. There's tons of them. There's also a lot of good to draw from. So it's not only like you have 2, like you said, 7 and Element Mystic, particularly Element Mystic. Although part of the reasons why these teams are good in Korea is that they have a bunch of players who are under 18. I mean, like Sparkle would have been signed if he wasn't 16 years old. Okay, so. Even
his frag movie's pretty fire, by the way. Watch that.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah,
so a lot of these players that are making these Korean contenders teams among the top in the world, the only reason that's happening is because OWL teams cannot sign the under 18 players. If the players who are good on those teams were signed, I think they wouldn't be obviously anywhere near the caliber that they are right now. That aside, I think there's plenty of talent, especially. We've seen a bunch of talented players get called up already from the contenders teams. Like Moth was a big upgrade for the San Francisco Shock, called up from the Boston or Toronto Esports, the Boston Uprisings contenders academy team. And obviously Flowers just chilling out there until he turns 18 right now. There will be enough players, and European contenders also. There are plenty of Euro players that didn't end up making it on.
Loads from Europe didn't. Like I think of all those players that were going to be on the Cloud9 team before they got the Koreans. Like a bunch of those didn't make it. So here's another thing. There's also, you have to remember, a bunch of players in the Overwatch League who have past connections to other players from other teams where they're probably good players, they're just on the wrong team right now, or they're surplus to requirements, they brought in someone better. So I'm sure there'll be a bunch of repurposed players, as it were, who'll go. I mean, if I look at half of the Dallas Fuel, I'm just waiting for half of them to leave and go to a different team and rework the team out. Like, that probably has to happen at some point in time, So it's not like you have to abandon all the players. I mean, a bunch of them have got big names, they've got some level of talent. Who knows? Maybe you could even play them in their actual role, and they could probably succeed or something. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, And yes, obviously in Korea, the real secret right now. So if you're an Overwatch League team, right, obviously you spent, the millions of dollars, you bought a slot, you've bought some staff, you're getting everything prepared. What you need now is we need sort of a Harvey Keitel from Pulp Fiction cleaner type figure who goes around to the players you're going to sign who are Koreans, and he checks, right, obviously you've been boosted, right, I can fix that for you, right, delete all these contacts here, contact my friend here, he'll vouch for you where you were on these hours, Now you have to understand, you were hacked at this point in time, he sets up the whole thing, and then you get to sign, he takes his finder's fee, and everything's cool. And also, he puts a dead horse's head in the Korean caster's bed, and he goes, well, maybe don't talk about that player. You wouldn't like anything to happen to you, would you? You are a great caster. We would like to see you continue. So.
I just like the fact that the Korean casters apparently think that if they say the names of the players, it's almost like if you say OGE 3 times, then 1,000 boosters will appear in the competitive ladder. What the fuck is even the logic behind this?
Who the fuck knows? Right, so here's a question for you. So a team that has had their fair share of struggles this stage is the Houston Outlaws. But first things first, Monty, Fact Fiction is alive. And he actually is allowed to play Overwatch now. Turns out they didn't just sign him out of pure nepotism. He's actually here to play Overwatch, bizarrely.
And he's playing well, too.
Yeah. So joke's on us for calling out all their roster being full. Right, what do you think of Houston Outlaws? What's the issue?
What I really liked seeing Houston this week with Fact Fiction and the roster has been that they actually dive now. They are capable of playing aggressively. They go in and they try and target the back line, and they do it on defense, which is so interesting for Houston. They'll play defense with a dive comp. It's incredible. Usually they just sit there with Widowmaker and Junkrat, or Widowmaker and Tracer, and passively wait for the other team to come to them. Now they're going in, and I think Fact Fiction enables this. He is certainly leading the charge when it comes to these dives, and it's given Houston a new dimension to their playstyle.
What do you think, Jayne?
I've always been a Muma fan. I consider him probably one of the top 4 best main tanks in the game.
Sure.
However, just like the Philadelphia Fusion, how we were talking about, they've signed people with overlapping hero roles and different play styles. How, Fraggy appeared to be synergizing better with Snillo than with Carpe. Muma's play style has always been a little bit unique on Winston. Now, we're seeing most of the teams playing their Winston kind of like in a flank position and looking for a dive, but Muma almost actively flanks at points of time. So his play style is a lot more passive, cautious. It's not like cowardly, but it's cautious. Whereas Fact Fiction, again, a more aggressive player. So it's not like there's, one empirically better than the other. Like, I think Muma is still, at least in my worthless opinion, a slightly better main tank. But yeah, Fact Fiction enables a different play style. So whereas previously they might have run an Orisa defense, now they are running that dive defense with Fact Fiction.
And the difference between these two players, again, like Fisher, Muma, I think, is hurt by the Sombra, because the way Muma plays, which is a fantastic way to play as long as you're not hacked and useless, is he waits for the team to come to them, and then what he does with his Primal Rage is he will jump over everybody who's attacking Houston, Primal Rage, and push both of their supports at the same time, just bat them out of line of sight, and then the rest of the team doesn't have healing. So he's in a 1-on-2 where he's denying all healing, and the rest of his team is in a 5 versus 4 where they're having an advantage in having the heals. That was great. That was fantastic for stage 1 and stage 2. They had other problems in stage 2 that weren't that. Their problem now is when Muma does that, and there's a Sombra on the enemy team, he gets hacked, and then he just stands there and does nothing and gets farmed by the Zenyatta for trans ult percentage. So I think that having Fact Fiction now, where he will bring the other DPS with him on a dive to attack, is the big difference maker. And whether that's a communication thing, where he just is like, he's the one in the comms organizing all of this, and that's why it's happening. I don't really know what the reasoning behind it is, but they're very different in terms of primarily how their teammates play around them.
Yeah, no disagreement there at all.
Okay. Because here's the thing as well, right? Even though Houston right now sits at a 1-3 record, like, to be fair, a couple of their losses were
they looked good.
Games. Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the schedule they have coming up, remember they've already played the two big Korean teams. They've played New York. They've played who was the other one? I think they've already played London as well. Yes,
yeah, they beat London. They beat London. Their one win is over London.
So if you look at the games they've got coming up, they've got Florida Mayhem and Dallas this week. So, okay, if you're actually going to be a top team, that's what the doctor ordered. Then you've got Valiant and Gladiators the week after. And then the final week is where you have Shock, and then you have Seoul as the last game. Now, if they're actually going to end up being a top team and they've figured out what they want to do with their lineup, that's a table you could run potentially, right?
They probably
are going to get.
Yeah, they probably will have to win out because you pretty much in previous stage playoffs have had to go 7-3 in order to make it. Sure. And I think even with the additional slot, maybe there's a chance they could go 6-4 with a very good map differential. But 7-3, I think, is the safe bet for making. So basically, they're in a position where they have to win out. But fortunately, they already won against London, and they played Boston, who had DreamKazper that week and was looking quite strong, and they played New York. And they played who else did they play? Philadelphia.
Yes.
So basically, they had to play against what I think we would consider like the top 3 and 4, top 3 to 4 teams right now already. So softer schedule. They sort of have the opposite problem of the Valiant, where the Valiant have gotten the wins, but things are about to get a lot more difficult for them.
And also, when they play Valiant, Monty, I noticed Junkertown is in there. Always what you like if you're a Houston Outlaws fan.
That's very true. They're fantastic at Junkertown. And also, we talk about certain teams having map kryptonites. When they play against good teams, you definitely don't want them to play Route 66, because even to this point in time, they have literally never captured Point B on Route 66. That's how fucking trash they are at this map. Ever.
Bad news. They've got that against Gladiators, Dynasty, and who else? And one more, and Shock. Now, Shock might not be able to matter anyway, but Dynasty
Soul might be able to do something
Dynasty
with that.
And Gladiators, that might be tricky. What do you think, Jayne? What do you think of this team? Houston Outlaws.
Oh, man. Like, what are they... It's kind of a weird one, because we also see like the coaching for the Houston Outlaws has always been, on paper really good. They've got Flame as their GM, they've got Tyrong as their coach, two very well-regarded coaches.
There's a but coming in here.
But there is a but. Yes, there absolutely is. So the first one is that they've had some very questionable decisions that has shown and caused them map losses in the past. For example, one of the times where we were seeing this really new meta composition on King's Row A, and if you remember, there was this newfangled defense where people were running the Orisa Diva on the high ground with the crossfire setup with the Widowmaker. Then they had the Mercy Zenyatta Junkrat. This was the new craze for how you defend King's Row, and people were trying different ways to counter this. This was the week in which you saw the Bastion, the May strat from the Dallas Fuel on attack, which failed gloriously, and Dallas Fuel got made fun of for. But during this whole time where the meta was evolving, and the only time that we'd seen this sort of evolving metagame previously was when Horizon Lunar Colony was going through its very rapid meta evolution. So we saw these brand new strats coming out from a lot of the teams on King's Row. And what did the Houston Outlaws do? They came in, they subbed Spree in on the Zarya. It's Zarya's row. So they subbed Spree in, they ran yesterday's meta, and they got creamed. They got full held. And then when they were talking about it after the fact, we're saying that, like, why did King's Row go so poorly? And the answer, to paraphrase, was basically, we felt comfortable on King's Row, so we didn't practice it. So there's been a few kind of like lapses or oversights in terms of how Houston has actually prepared as a team for some of these matches. And, I'm going to bring it up. Was Arhan really the best pickup for the Houston Outlaws?
How dare you?
We're going
You have to understand Monty's one of the biggest Arhan haters of all time.
I think I don't even understand it at all. So
Monty was talking shit on the guy when he was in like Apex finals and stuff.
But, I'm going to ask the same question. Some of these signings, they don't make sense to me. Like Damon getting picked up for the Shanghai Dragons, which I'm sure we'll get to. Was he really the best free agent tracer that Shanghai
Nene
Dragons
was.
No.
Absolutely. Right. There were other better picks. So why was Arhan selected for the Outlaws? Why was Damon selected for the Shanghai Dragons? There's some question marks here, and Houston Outlaws, they've well-regarded GM, well-regarded coach, but they have, I can point to specific points, Kings Row being the most
Something
explicit
in the water
example.
down there in Texas.
Well, they've made some questionable decisions. Great team, but they've had hiccups.
Jayne, I haven't actually noticed in this episode. Are you one of these people who doesn't swear?
Oh, no. I'm extremely profane. I've just got to switch.
I just wondered because,
I wasn't sure if this is a PG production or not, so I erred on the side of not swearing.
Definitely not. Don't worry about that. I just noticed.
Anything PG
production? I just got thrown when you said creamed. Like, I was like, what? I thought you were going to say fucking wrecked, and you were like, dude, creamed them.
It's ex-military, right? You're speaking to your friends, it's fuck this, fuck that. When you speak to an officer, yes sir, no sir, that's just a light switch. So we have the switch turned off.
Because the thing is, I have heard that like stereotype about Canadians, they're so friendly. You have to realize I only know Sadikists, so I didn't know if that was true or not. I didn't know, I can only go with my lived experience. So anyway. I just wondered if you're one of those guys who said like frickin' or something, instead of like,
by the way, my favorite part about that entire Saturday business was him admonishing XQC like a month earlier, saying that he was embarrassed that XQC was Canadian based on his behavior. That is just mint, man. That is mint.
Virtue signaling at its finest.
I know. Yeah, that is the ultimate comeuppance, obviously. That is hilarious. Self-ownage. That's always the best, right? Okay. Right. Well, here's the thing. We normally don't spend much time on the Shanghai Dragons, actually, Jayne.
There's a lot of interesting things.
They've become such a depressing team. But you're right.
And
obviously
straight up, I watched because again, I analyze. I try and analyze 2 Overwatch League matches per week on my stream on Sundays. And very early on in the stage, viewers kept requesting me to review the Shanghai Dragons. So I reviewed the first game on Shanghai Dragons versus the Florida Mayhem. I didn't even get halfway through Dorado before I quit that analysis in disgust. And I kind of swore that I would not analyze the Shanghai Dragons again until they won a series. Now, I broke that promise when Gaguri had her premiere, and honestly, I've been really impressed with Gaguri, working with what she's had.
Sure.
But some of the other things that are going on with the Shanghai Dragons certainly have not looked as strong. And again, the one that I'm going to bring up is Damon. That signing kind of confuses me. So I definitely think like Nene would have been a much better pick. And I don't know Korean contender scene very well.
Nobody wants to watch them, Damon. We all want to watch them, Nene. That's the title of the episode.
But yeah, isn't Craggy of age as well? Like, he's an English speaker, of course, but there's other superior players that I think could have been picked up. Now, Guri, I think, was a good sign. Now, Sky is one guy who's coming in very highly regarded, but at least in the game versus Dallas Fuel, Sky was just getting farmed by Effect. Now, was that kind of Effect doing his whole the desk picked Dallas Fuel, watch me prove you wrong, and just kind of like rage farming Sky? Or was it that it looked like Sky was caught out of position?
We also, they just don't play him since then, so...
Oh, have they not? Yeah, I haven't watched the game since Dallas Fuel. But
do you have any info for us, Monty, on that? Oh, sorry, Jayne. You finish your point, mate?
Nope.
It's just I'm not quite sure because again I only watched the series against the Dallas Fuel. But is it Sky's fault that he's being caught out of position in effective farming, or is it the rest of the Shanghai Dragons kind of not supporting him the same way?
I think the problem is that before Dia came back, it was 2 Korean DPS and 2 Korean tanks, and then a Chinese support line, and they couldn't communicate with each other, so they were not protected at all. And this was even happening later after Dia came back this week against the Shock. Their tank line is entirely disconnected from their support line right now, and I think that's just a communication issue. I've talked to the operations manager over at the Shanghai Dragons, and he told me that the Korean players are learning Chinese pretty quickly because in-game comms are not actually that difficult in a different language. There's only so much you need to be able to understand, and they have Korean and Chinese translators for the more complex coaching stuff. But it has been an issue that their supports have struggled because they get zero protection.
Yeah, so Sky and Damon have been the big question marks for me. But
it's already Dia's back, so
like Gaguri, Dia, Ado, Fearless, those guys are all looking really strong. Like Fearless and Gaguri, huge improvements. So Shanghai Dragons, again, another team. We're not talking about any team that's on a downward trajectory, thankfully. People we were thinking that Boston might be, but they kind of proved that they're at least going to hold their own. So yeah, Shanghai Dragons, definitely improvements.
The problem here, though, is it's like I just said about the shock, Jayne. It's like, congrats, Shanghai Dragons. You're improving finally. Almost the whole rest of the league's improved.
Exactly, right?
So it doesn't really matter if you can go 10 miles an hour faster if you're being lapped by everyone already.
The Shanghai Dragons of today or the Shanghai Dragons of 2 weeks from now.
Oh, they'd beat the shit out of Stage 1 Shanghai Dragons.
Exactly. They would, as you say, they would fucking wreck Shanghai Dragons from Stage 1.
They'd be amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. But we're talking Stage 3 Overwatch League, not Stage 1 Overwatch League. This is no longer the standard. The standard is up here now. So
yeah, exactly.
Do they go 0-40?
Do you think they ever win? Basically,
I don't see any way they don't. As much as I gave people, the analyst, a lot, like the desk, a lot of shit for predicting Dallas Fuel to lose to Shanghai Dragons. That was legitimately their best shot. Yeah. It was their only shot.
Yes,
the shot was a moonshot. But it was their only shot. It was the only opportunity.
People were getting super hyped this last week because they tied up against San Francisco at halftime. People are saying, okay, this might be the time to do it. But they couldn't even beat San Francisco when Super was sick and not in the game, and San Francisco's shot calling was falling apart.
Yeah, it's not just they're going against the lower teams. They're going against the lower teams who are handicapped.
Yeah, they got the gimped fuel shock. The gimped shock.
They had the gimped fuel too, and they couldn't beat either. So I think it's 0-40.
Unfortunately, you have to add into the mix. First of all, they are clearly the team that other people go, right, well, if I'm playing someone else good this week, I'm going to put none of my time into the Shanghai Dragons game and everything. So they're already, in theory, getting an extra edge in these games to potentially win. And then secondly, these are the weeks where they've been putting in different players. There's a surprise factor. So once all of these factors are gone, it's even harder to win.
So not only do you suspect, obviously, the teams are not preparing for it, but then you see teams, even when they don't have players like Super who are sick, they'll run their B roster, which you would think Shanghai might be able to get, scrap together a map win or two, and then maybe push it to map 5 as the team goes, oh shit, we actually have to put in our good players now. And then maybe there's even a better chance of them for winning, but I just don't even see it under those circumstances. Unfortunately, I think that it's going to take so long to develop the synergy that by the time they develop the synergy, the other teams, it's not like the other teams are going to stop improving, period.
Yeah. And by the way, just as a very quick abstract point, we don't have tons of time here, so I'll just make it quickly. Right? People might think, okay, but in, for example, League of Legends, you had some teams who had some international success and were very good teams who combined Koreans with Chinese players. But I will say this. First of all, as a game, League of Legends by that point in time was more so somewhat by the numbers as to how the roles play and how they interact at different points in the game. And remember, in the early part of a League of Legends game, you play in your lane and are basically 1 versus 1 at certain times, which is nothing like a game like Overwatch, where you are constantly having to communicate and adapt to what's happening and an ever-changing scenario in the game, which you practice roughly for, but you've never practiced for exactly that scenario that appears at a certain moment in a game. So I think as a game, it's unfair to compare in that sense. And then finally, most of the teams that we're talking about that had the success with the Korean players, because there was many League of Legends teams did not have success, were the teams that got the best players in the world who were Korean players. So that's also unfair, because it's not like Shanghai Dragons has added in fucking Fletter and Profit. They didn't do that.
Exactly.
Then they might win some games by brute force.
Out of everything, I think that's the It's not that they went and got the superstars to come over.
If they'd have added in, Fisher and people, then they might have fluked a game. I agree. Yeah, exactly.
So the other, like, they're not even getting what we would consider like superstar players to come over, right? And add to the point earlier, we don't even know if we can criticize their pickup of Damon, but for all we know, players probably refused to sign with them.
Yes. You have to do the counterfactual, basically. Like, who else did they have the option for? As far as we know, no one. Like, basically, they either had to go the Chinese route, and if you've ever heard any earlier episodes, I mean, it seems pretty reasonable theory. The working theory is the reason why they couldn't get the best players in China is A, some of them probably aren't actually the age if everyone checks a background check, and B, some of them apparently just didn't want to come. So
let's
unfortunately, they didn't have the choice to get the cream of like. This is actually the saddest thing about Shanghai Dragons, Monty, is if you really had put the 5 best Chinese players at their positions in the league, people will think I don't know anything about Overwatch, so fair enough. I think they would be a middle of the table team if you had the best Chinese players.
Yes, I think they would.
There's definitely talent in China, absolutely.
Well, but even when they're trying to sign other Chinese players right now, so let's pretend we're halfway. You can either sign a contract with the Shanghai Dragons where like, even if you play amazingly, you're not going to look great because you're losing all your matches. You have to go into a situation with new synergy. Maybe you're already here and you're a contenders player like Nene is, but why would Nene sign a contract when Nene's thinking to himself, there are going to be, a bunch of new teams coming next year that I could just sign on and I wouldn't have to necessarily deal with all the bad stuff of being on this Shanghai Dragons roster that's massively underperforming. Why would I sign a year or 2 long contract for a team that I have no faith in and is just going to make me look worse? I'd rather just stay in contenders for the other 2 stages and then sign on for something later on, right? I wouldn't sign with the Shanghai Dragons if I was good.
I also don't want to have to be one of the best in the world at Overwatch while learning Chinese.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not fun for me.
That sounds not great. I agree. That's a great point. And also to your other point, Thorin, which is that when we had these Korean players go over, yes, they were also the best, but also we didn't see a lot of good results until many of these players became fluent in Chinese. Rookie is like Easyhoon, Rookie. These guys became fluent in Chinese. So,
okay.
It took time for them to get there, right? So not only were they top tier players, but they took the time to become fluent in Chinese, which is obviously not something that anybody could reasonably be expected to do by the time the Overwatch League is over for this season.
Right. Here's the thing, Monty. You haven't got very much time left before you have to go, and there's 2 teams. So pick the one that we talk about. There's either the Dallas Fuel or there's the Florida Mayhem. So which one's the more interesting one to talk about? I'll give you the choice.
Valiant, not Mayhem.
Oh, we didn't do Valiant, that's true. Which of these 3 teams should we do?
We'll talk about the Valiant once they play against them. And Jayne can pick the between Mayhem and Fuel.
There you go. There's the Sophie's choice. Do you want the Dallas Fuel, who almost win games, or the Florida Mayhem, who you're right, have improved, but does it matter? Because again, it doesn't matter if you can run a bit faster if you're the one that the Lion's right behind.
I think we got to talk about the Dallas Fuel. Now, who doesn't want to talk about the Dallas Fuel?
Well, again, we haven't got too much time here, okay? So there can't be a whole thing of worms opened, and then we can't. I don't want any mentions of Facebook posts or tweets or transparency. Okay. I just want to know about Dallas Fuel in the game.
I'll pose a question to you. I'll pose a question to you. Now that we've got their main tank situation figured out, and OGE is, I assume, going to play main tank. I don't think we're going to see Tymo, Harry Hooker, Chips take up main tank anytime soon.
Well, he's been playing and they've been doing better.
Yeah, so now that we've got the main tank situation resolved, how long until Mickey? Is Mickey the next guy on the chopping block, or who's the new weakest link?
So I think Mickey, it's their supports.
You think it's their supports? I thought it was like the weak link to me. I think, especially with Unko has been a great improvement, absolutely. But I think that Mickey, a lot like Miro for the Seoul Dynasty, is kind of playing not yesterday's meta, but yesterday's play style for these heroes. And when we're looking at how
he's playing like the old diva, right?
He's playing like the old diva, yeah. And XQC famously had his rant. It was one of the reasons that he got in trouble, was that he was mad at basically Fate and Envy, Fate being just so aggressive, but him getting away with it because Envy was always there backing him up. And Mickey's playstyle almost never backed up the main tank's dive.
How could he synergize with the main tank when he had different main tanks every week? And then he was the main tank. All right. I think
fair.
I think the Mickey criticism is like way overboard because he has not had a stable main tank to actually play around. And then he was literally the main tank. So I think he's actually looked better ever since OGE came in the very brief period of time we've had to look at it. So I'm going to give this one a little bit of time before we make a judgment on Mickey, because I don't think it's anywhere near fair to like judge Mickey on that.
Okay, so Unco, I think, has been a great improvement for the support lineup for the Dallas Fuel. Why do you think that the Dallas Fuel supports are the weakness? Like, yeah,
I think maybe it's like Harry Hook, or Chips hasn't been looking good. Harry's been doing better though since Unco's been in. So maybe you're right. I think this team just I don't know how good they are because they keep switching AKM and Rascal in and out.
Yeah, and Rascal again, like he was gone for this last little bit, and AKM's Sombra has been questionable at best, I think. So once we start getting people actually on their roles and practicing and getting used to it, I think we'll see improvements. But I think Mickey is probably one of the ones that I'd be looking at the weakness. Getting AKM on the roles that he's actually good at is a big importance. When he was running
Rascal being in the country,
right? Yeah, that's all. That's
always OG not being suspended.
Yeah, so like I think again, just the same sort of the other team's upward trajectory, but I think there is still a lot more problems to fix. A lot of the other teams have kind of they're putting that last little piece of patchwork on the hole in the boat. They're taking on water and they've put that last little patch on. And Dallas Fuel just kind of very carefully goes up with duct tape and puts one tiny strip of tape over the hole and then kind of like looks down the hull of the boat at like the 20 other holes that are also leaking water. So we're making improvements, but there's a lot of other things that are going wrong that I think could be improved, and trying to, determine like, this one's leaking 4 times as fast as this one. It's hard to tell what exactly the issue is, but it's certainly not one issue. And again, we're going to come back to how completely opaque Kai has been with what efforts they're trying to do. Like we had Hastro come out a couple of weeks ago saying like full control in the hands of Kai, and Kai did some interviews which, more than providing any new information to fans, basically threw some of his teammates, the members of his team under the bus. Promises to be more transparent and then silence. So again, it's hard to judge what exactly the coaching staff of Dallas Fuel is doing simply because we don't have a fucking clue.
I do enjoy seeing Effect just build his rage meter for every week of practice.
At some point, he's just going to melt down.
And he go, no, but in the game though, he just go ham, like fair play. I have a lot of respect for players who can be in teams that are a mess, but they still just go fucking ham and this is just the best anyway. I can respect that, because obviously it's the easiest excuse ever, isn't it? Oh, my team was in disarray, they were changing players, but if you can still just kill it, fair play. I respect that. It's not the end of the episode. We're also wearing different clothing and don't seem like the exact same people in the same exact mental state and point of consciousness, do we? We aren't. We're totally different people. We've had atoms change inside our bodies. We've consumed different chemicals. I made that sound more sinister than it needed to be. Just factual, though. We have literally consumed different chemicals. Y'all know what type of chemicals I like. But anyway.
Some more fun than others, really.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. You'll know what type of shit I like. So this is a bizarre addendum to the episode. Now, what I like is, if you know the way I edit the VOD, there's nothing going to be between that. It just cuts from when you make a point to this. So we're here now. And the real reason why is because my prescient powers of psychic ability, allowed me in the episode. Allowed me in the episode to point out that there's this weird trend where big drama seems to drop right after we film the episode. So of course, literally, like I think it was like moments after this one.
No, it wasn't moments. Like we finished taping it in the afternoon, but then they announced this garbage at like midnight or something on a Sunday. Who does that, by the way? Who announces?
Was it even Monday morning? It was Sunday, like late night, and maybe waiting for us to finish recording and waiting for XQC to finish streaming, but they missed that.
See, that's really dumb. So here's why it's dumb to announce things at midnight in esports. It's because that's when everyone's drunk, and if you do that if you make bomb announcements when everybody's intoxicated, then you get much hotter takes in the end, right? In the middle of the night. Makes you look worse. Do it during the day. Do it during the morning. Everybody will wake up with a fresh mind, fresh eyes, fresh take.
So the reason for this addendum is, if you remember, we talked a little bit about the Dallas Fuel, but we now know the story, which is that they have released Kai, their coach, and Rascal, who is obviously one of the more recent additions to the team, who only got there last stage towards the end, as far as I remember.
And was a good addition.
Well, that debatable. Apparently they do not agree, Jayne. So, so along with that, we also, as if this wasn't enough, had Hastro did an AMA. Now, here's the thing about AMAs, I've always said, is that the title's not actually as good as you think, because it says, ask me anything. It doesn't say, I will answer anything. It also doesn't say, I will answer truthfully. So you can ask anything you want, and I can say whatever I want, and then, we haven't really gotten anywhere, have we? So, anyway, don't know why I'm bringing that up.
Thorin wants AMAs to actually be legal depositions, where you have to swear, you're accountable in a court of law, you must answer every question, even if the answer is, I don't recall.
You must at least go on record. Exactly. And that must be held in some sort of a vault somewhere. And people do like that test out a Blade Runner on you at the same time to see if there's any mental disturbance along certain questions. Not really the sort of fun, marketable PR stunt that AMAs are supposed to be, really, but we have different expectations, right? So let's start here. So I've got a lot of possible topics from the Hastro AMA, but let's just start with the big basic overview. So first of all, since you brought it up, Jayne, just as a player, what do you think of the fact that they've released Rascal, who, as I said, was pretty much one of the newer player to join? So surprised by this, presumably?
Yeah, most people were. The hashtag Fire Kai Thing was a very sizable presence on both Twitter and Reddit. I think some people were putting it more tongue-in-cheek than anything, but it was hard to really judge whether Kai should be gone, regardless of what the prevailing opinion was on Reddit. However, nowhere on Twitter or Reddit or just in the general populace were people calling for the release of Rascal. If anything, they thought that this was, really quite a big improvement for the Dallas Fuel. And in the fact, his presence, or rather lack of presence, in the game against Shanghai is one of the many reasons in which the analysts and commentators predicted that this was Shanghai Dragons' best chance to beat the Dallas Fuel, because Rascal was in Korea. He was brought on for that X factor. That's something that was brought up by Hastro, is that he had quite high level of mechanical skill, and his character flexibility, specifically on that Genji, a role that the Dallas Fuel has been lacking, patched quite a few holes for the Dallas Fuel and made them a much stronger team overall. So based on the announcement that's coming out of the Dallas Fuel, he was released for reasons not in-game, but how he meshed with the rest of the team or how he acted during practices or scrims. But yeah, it was just shock. It was the general emotion when we kind of found out that Rascal was getting released.
Yeah, and also, you'd think that, obviously, they were pretty blunt about why he was released in their statement, that he didn't mesh well with the team, and that clearly his teammates, because the whole line that Hastro's been saying now is that the team must agree on things, so clearly his teammates were not getting along with him. But you'd think that his skill set, obviously, like you say, on the Genji, but also we're in a huge Sombra meta right now, and his Sombra is maybe it's definitely one of the best in the league, maybe arguably the best in the league. So you have a player who fills your Genji hole, is flexible onto other heroes, can also play one of the most powerful heroes in the current meta. So on paper, this looks like a very bad move, but it seems like there are pretty big personality conflicts driving it.
And there were some leaks coming out, like in Custa's Discord, where he said that Rascal was not working well in the team. And that they were, some people were surprised about Kai's release in turn. But, this, again, Rascal Sombra, really quite good. And especially compared to, AKM, who's traditionally been playing the Sombra for them with Rascal's absence, that's left a lot to be desired. So unless we're, going to be Siegel moving into more of this DPS role, which who the hell knows? Maybe. Like Hastro indicated that Siegel might be seeing more playtime, but who knows whether that'll actually come to pass. But unless Siegel actually sees more playtime and more playtime on like the DPS role instead of sharing that diva responsibility with Mickey, then we're back to that same Dallas Fuel that, they may have coverage on most of the heroes, but the people that they have covering those very meta roles, like Sombra, simply aren't OWL standard.
That is a very weird reason to give, though, for Rascal, that he didn't mesh with the team. Like, at this point in time, who the fuck does mesh with this team? Apparently none of this team meshes. Coaches don't mesh with the team. New players don't mesh with the team. Effect doesn't mix with anyone called not Effect in the team. Like, nothing meshes. Now, here's the thing. I get the premise. Like, you want to, with a team like this, you want to basically find what parts do work and then continue on from there. So obviously them firing their coach is a big deal, because I have to admit, as an immediate, like, naive outsider, that would be the first thing I would assume if I looked at a team like Dallas Fuel, where they've got talent, but they're not getting anywhere close to the results. I would assume coaching problem. Now, in that scenario, I've experienced this way too many times in esports, and it's always the same script plays out, is that fans just blame the coach if the results are bad. Now, the problem with that is, because that can come from a place of ignorance, like it's just because the results are bad, then what happens is every player or coach or commentator who is a friend of that coach thinks, well, this person isn't an idiot and they're not bad, so I will come out and I will sort of like stand by them and say, no, this person, you know, they're really trying and they're doing a good job. But the problem with that is it doesn't really address the real issue to me, which is, does that coach fit that group of players? You could be a fantastic coach, but it might be the wrong group of players, or maybe culturally it's the wrong set of people who, like, you know, if you're a very strict coach, for example, you can't have a bunch of players who want to have a lot of say and want to play a certain way and maybe disagree with you entirely on, like, coaching philosophy. So what do you actually know about Kai, Monty? He's someone you have some sort of acquaintance with, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've known him for a while now. You know, I saw his work on Team USA, and I know that he has a good mind for the game. I mean, we've seen what happens when he basically puts together a group of players, which was the Team USA World Cup, did extensive scrimming of these new players, was very thorough, I think, alongside Stur and Jason Kaplan in testing them and making sure that they had the best group of players possible, which is why some of these comments by Hastro are like really confusing to me, because knowing previously how thorough he was on trialing players and trying to find synergy for the USA World Cup team, it seems really weird that Hastro is saying now in this AMA that they didn't trial the players, and yet it was Kai's decision to sign the players, because that goes against what he said previously on Twitter like a month ago, where he tweets that Kai has full control now, implying that he did not have full control previously. So we still haven't really gotten any answers about who was signing these players onto this roster. Was it the management? Was it Kai? We don't know, but without the trialing, it does seem to go against what Kai has done in the past, which makes me, when he was totally in control of a situation, which makes me question the legitimacy of that.
One thing I found very interesting was where, in line with what you said about giving Kai full control and making that even a public statement, was that Hastro said in the AMA that he doesn't know why the organization started to make decisions which didn't include the players, and he claims he thinks that's a mistake. Now, I can tell you from knowing him in CSGO, which is the game
okay,
I have the
most transparency. I have a different philosophy, which is that you should not let the inmates run the asylum.
Sure. Yeah, but this is what I'm going to get to. Is the game that I know Hastro the best in is CSGO, where I know a lot of the players that have been involved in his teams, which were all the French teams, and I know some of the things he's told me over the years. And I have to say, in CSGO, the players basically made every decision in that team pretty much. As in, yes, sometimes he had to sign off on it or make the final, but basically they brought their ideas to him. And in that case, I don't blame him early on in CSGO because his team was winning. So if you've got a winning team and you have an in-game leader, for example, who seems to have a vision, I mean, that's the equivalent of a coach at that point in time. You know, you are he is deputized in some degree. The problem is, though, what I'm getting at here is, I actually think this tends to be a philosophy of Hastro's. And you have to remember, this is someone who himself was a professional player and really does ascribe to the idea that pro players themselves sort of know what they should be doing, and, you know, winners have the right mindset to get back to that point, which is very different from what you're putting forward, Monty, which is what I generally go with, which is the idea that in an ideal world, the coach decides these things and the players play.
Yes, exactly. And I think that the difference is that, so in other esports previously, if we go to CSGO or we think about League of Legends previously, before there was franchising, sometimes you unfortunately as an owner had to let the players run things, because if you didn't, then you would lose everything. right? You'd get relegated, the players would be unhappy, they would play like shit, and you had no leverage. You know what I mean? If you are a CSGO team and you're going from tournament to tournament to tournament, and you have to make tough decisions in order to get better or impose a lot more structure on your players, which they may reject at first, if they get unhappy and their performance dips, well, so long to your major slots, so long to your tournament invitations. It's sort of a death warrant for the team. However, Hastro has now bought into a franchise system. Not only has he bought into a franchise system, he's bought into one where you can have literally an entire alternate team on your bench. So now is the time to introduce a firm top-down structure, and perhaps this is his way of doing that. To his credit, getting rid of Kai, maybe taking a more hands-on approach with the team, but the way he's saying he's doing it, which is to let the players run the team, is, I think, a poor decision, because the top players will always fight against being benched and fight against structure that is designed to make them better if it makes them uncomfortable or it makes them work harder, or, you know, etc. It makes them work with people outside of their comfort zone. So I don't know. I think that in a franchise system, you as the owner have all of the leverage, and giving control over to the players is a mistake. I would not do that if I owned an Overwatch League team.
Well, there's also the fact that, like, do you really want someone to make a decision now who might not be here in 2 years?
Exactly.
That decision might still impact you. It's your team. You do actually own this team. I hope you're aware of that, Hastro. It's sort of your toy, mate.
So weirdly, what I agree with about Hastro is blowing up the structure. I don't think maybe getting rid of Kai was the answer, because I think I think that it sounds like getting rid of Rascal may have been a good thing for the team, even though he was a strong player. So in true Dallas Fuel fashion, of course, everybody's on their streams after this. Everybody's on Twitter after this. And what's hilarious to me is that now Wins, who of course is the former Rogue player, former Quake player, he is now on Twitter. He's ACAM's brother. And here's his tweet. Let me read this to you. So now we're getting leaks, like secondhand leaks, which he says this: Rascal sure manipulated the crowd well, still being seen as this flawless little angel who only wanted the team to work harder. Evidence is out there. He got cut from 2 different teams despite his talent. He is toxic and impossible to work with. Now, that's a pretty fucking strong condemnation for a guy who has literally never played with Rascal, and as far as I know, has like never interacted with him outside maybe like ladder or being around him at Apex at a certain point in time. So this is, now the leaks are coming through other people who are affiliated with the members of the team. And why the hell can't they put a lid on this? It's just, it's so ridiculous.
Like that, mate. Like, the French scene is notorious for everything getting out like that, where you tell your best friend and then he tells his best, and then everyone's got a best friend. So unless you're just a hermit, you will hear all the information, unfortunately. Okay, what about this then? So one of the reasons why it seems like they've cut Kai, if you read between the lines of what they said, is basically because the players demanded it. Like, it's absolutely clear, because they even then mentioned that they wanted to keep him on as an assistant coach, but that the players didn't want that either. So apparently, just a full revolt.
Yeah, there's been some really conflicting information on whether or not the players or the organization were the ones who wanted Kai out. Now, Hastro himself talks about how it was a team decision, and let me find the exact quote here. But yeah, the option of keeping Kai on as an assistant coach was offered to the players, but they decided it, quote, would not be ideal for us to make progress. So there's this kind of information coming out directly from Hastro's AMA, and then again, Costa in the the leaks from his Discord mentioned that Kai didn't seem to be the problem, and then there was also moments from XQC's stream which didn't really point to, again, Kai being a major issue. Now, of course, XQC is a former player of the Dallas Fuel. He may not have the most up-to-date information, but
might also be a little bit bitter.
Maybe just
might be a little bit bitter. Who knows? But
incentivized in some sense to
it's there's also the question of what was Kai's actual mandate as a coach. We don't really know. We know what he's done.
No, because he has a conflicting mandate, because we don't know what his mandate is, because it was both not in complete control, but then retroactively said he was in complete control the entire time.
And on top of
this
is something interesting, is that somebody specifically asked in the Hastro AMA, basically, what you know, what Kyle is doing. What was Kai's coaching style? And Hastro, and again, this is a direct quote, says, I won't speak to what Kyle's coaching style is, but what they're looking for from the next head coach is organization, motivation, leadership, and strategy. So is that
wow? That is
answer?
That's the most generic
to Kai.
No, but here's the thing, though, Monty. I can actually tell you, Monty. I'll give you a little story.
What the fuck is that?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we have no idea what Kai's mandate was. We don't know what he was doing. We don't know if he was like mainly a player coach. We don't know if he was microing strategies or microing character improvements. But we're also seeing, and it was mentioned during the XQC IRL stream afterwards that let me again find this. I took pretty extensive notes on this one, but yeah, he XQC is basically saying that Mickey's a great player, but he didn't get the right guidance from the coaches on his diva playstyle, so it became outdated. And there's been other moments in time where we've seen basically people indicating that individuals on like their hero play or the changing meta, they're not getting the guidance that they need on playing their heroes in the updating meta or the compositions that they're actually fielding. So we're seeing kind of like glimpses of coaching not like covering all the bases they need to, and we don't know if that was Kai's job. We don't know if it was the assistant coach's job. I honestly didn't even realize that the Dallas Fuel had assistant coaches until Sunday when I looked them up on Wikipedia. They have two, and they're apparently hiring more assistant coaches, physical trainers, player managers on top of their GM and their director of operations. So
yeah,
like, there's a lot more to this, but Kai.
Yeah, Peak, their assistant coach, who is the acting head coach right now, got there, I think, at the end of stage 1. He wasn't there at the start of the season, but somewhere around that timeline.
The stuff about Coco is also very bizarre.
Oh, yes.
Because on the one hand, he goes out of his way to say that Coco's still on the roster and everyone in the org loves him, that XQC was originally signed to fill the gap from Coco's Winston play, but then says that like they're still working to find out what's best for his future, whether that be remaining with us or having him available for another team.
That says that they want to sell him to an expansion team in my mind.
And is that the reason why they're not saying publicly what's going wrong with him? Because it's a very, very weird difference between how they are basically immediately released Rascal and more or less the wording in the PR statement after the termination of Rascal and Kai was very negative, or at least could very easily be interpreted as negative towards Rascal. But Coco, again, everybody's, not saying anything. Everyone's avoiding the topic, giving non-answers. Is the reason they're not coming out and saying what went wrong with Coco because they want somebody to buy him? The difference between how they treated in Rascal and Coco makes no sense to me.
I mean, I think there's a difference, though, in that with Rascal, it's been pretty clear that it was an attitude issue and not a performance issue. Whereas having known Coco for like the last year and a half, I find it very difficult to believe that it's an attitude issue with him unless it's a lack of motivation. So, and that would tie into more of it being a gameplay issue. I mean, he's a sweetheart and he's a good teammate. So I would find it very difficult to believe that it was similar to Rascal. But it is weird that they don't say anything about how they're planning to use him besides these generic statements. I mean, it's fine for him to be a bench player. Some players end up being that way. But the problem again, we keep going over this on the show with being a bench player is you don't have any way to practice to improve your skills. So you sort of just atrophy.
And he also said in the AMA that playing Taimu instead of Coco was the coach's decision.
I'm sure he would have taken credit if it worked out.
I think that really says that there's something performance-wise happening. And I don't think that Kai would intentionally, if that was Kai's decision as stated, I don't think Kai would be intentionally making his team play worse. So I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, there's the possible link here is to another story that XQC told on his stream where he brought up a specific instance that he was so he wasn't playing in the scrim, but he was spectating it, and it was a match on Eichenwald against the Houston Outlaws. Jake, of course, ran his signature Junkrat on attack, and it basically tilted, the Dallas Fuel after they defended. And Coco had basically come out and said, like, what was the plan? We didn't have a plan. And the team fired back at him saying, that was your job. So... And let me find the Yeah, so since then, and again, this is kind of like a summary of what he said, basically that he'd been seen as damaged goods because he didn't take on the onus of calling any shots. And also, one of the main reasons that was like listed or said publicly about why Taimu, or an individual who has traditionally played hitscan DPS, is suddenly making this massive transition to main tank is so that they could have some sort of structure in the shot calling role. So
Yeah.
that at least gives credence to this incident as being one of the reasons why Coco is being phased out, either a lack of confidence or inability to shot call or temperament during scrims. But that's probably giving at least a hint to the reasons why Taimu was put onto main tank instead of Coco. He lost confidence in shot calling, or the team lost confidence in his shot calling, and they needed to work with what they had.
So here's the thing about XQC's story, though. If that story is true and accurate, that his teammates lost confidence on him and made a decision not to play with him any longer, then I ask you this. Wasn't the team always, the players always in control of the roster decisions at that point in time?
Monty, when people say these statements, there is complete fuckery using semantics at every single point in time. What does full control mean? Because when I read a sentence, okay, remember the purpose of language is purely to communicate. Now, you could also make that cynical statement that people sometimes say, which is that language was invented when the first guy wanted to lie. And he was like, tell you what, there's someone up there in the sky who wants you to give me half of your shit. Like, that's like a joke I once heard someone say. So you could go cynical and say it's also for deceptive purposes. But if you're trying to genuinely communicate, when you say a sentence like, Kai has full control from now, the reasonable interpretation of that is he did not have full control before. When later on you say he had full control from the beginning, full control, it's full. You can't get any more control. Now, if I don't have control over who's in the team, how they play, who starts, who we recruit, who we cut, I don't have full. If there's a little bit of room, even if I've got 90%, it's not full, is it?
Yeah, and we don't know if the full control refers to his mandate as a coach. We don't know if full control means that he can overrule.
You know what, Astro?
Maybe
no, fucking clue.
No. Maybe it meant when he tweeted that it was a reminder of the state of perpetuity of full control. So he was like, Kai has full control now. He doesn't mention that he also had full control previously, but in that particular moment when the tweet happened, he's like, hey guys, remember? He has full control right now still.
So you mean he was trying to refer to the classic Mitch Hedberg joke, which is, I used to do drugs. I still do drugs, but I also used to do them. So you're implying that that's the level Hastro's operating on. I don't think he's got that level of guile or good
he's
material.
Not technically wrong.
Exactly. And by the way, as expected, what he's managed to do here is he's answered tons of questions. He's given a few little breadcrumbs, but as expected, in a scenario where everything's gone wrong. So actually, if you did want to do transparency, now's the actual time to do it. When you've made all the big harsh cuts, you're saying, I'm going to do a full reset, we're going to go a different direction. Now's the time you could give us info on this. Instead, we basically have no info. We have a bunch of red herrings and dead ends that all lead on a wild goose chase that never take you anywhere, because at the end you end up with a scenario where everyone had full control, nobody had full control, everyone made a decision collectively, someone made a decision on their own, and then someone joined, but then they weren't kicked for being a player, they were kicked for their attitude, but elsewhere someone isn't playing anymore, but we still like him as a person, so is that for his, it's like you've almost gone out of your way not to actually communicate anything that actually mattered in this AMA.
And also, it's just ridiculous. Like the things he's saying can easily be picked apart. So, for example, we've criticized them frequently for everybody running off to their streams or Twitter to talk mad shit or make fans really worried about the team at the very least, or give way too much insight that fans don't need about what's going on in an individual's perspective. And he said that they have given social media advisement to their players, but they can't put tape over their mouths to prevent them from saying things.
Can't they?
He says that there's they don't have the ability to silence them contractually. But the thing is, okay, that may be true.
Pretty sure they do.
I'm pretty sure, first off, as a former team owner, I'm pretty sure they do. And at the bare minimum, they have control over the starting roster. And I think that it's perfectly reasonable to go tell your players, hey guys, this is really hurting the team cohesion when you do this. It's not helping anybody right now. If you start sharing more of this information, you are going to be benched.
Yeah, absolutely. There's even if it could not be enforced contractually, there's other ways that you could incentivize the issue.
It's like he doesn't believe that the concept of discipline exists.
Oh, he also doesn't, apparently, Monty, believe in the concept of persuasion. He actually thinks like someone comes to Hastro, oh, you're not going to believe it. What's going on? AKM's telling everyone what's going on in the team on the Discord. Oh, fuck, is there anything in the contract where I can like put sort of like a legal gag on him? No, there isn't. Oh, well, in that case, there's basically nothing I could do. Maybe go talk to him. Yeah, but what am I going to say? I can't tell him he's legally bound to stop talking.
Well, they said they've given social media advisement. At the very least, you could make a strong impression that this player may not be retaining their contract with you if they continue to behave in a certain way.
I'd just go the other way. I'd use the carrot, mate. I'd just say, listen. I'd pick people who were obvious examples. Effect, someone like this, I'd say, you are going to be one of my franchise players. I want to build a team with you for a long time. Now, we got a lot of problems at the moment, and you know what? Probably not going to be fixed in the next few weeks. In fact, some of your teammates might have to be cut. But as a result, I'm going to need you to really sort of treat them with kid gloves, be very careful. I'm going to take on board all your advice. If you have any frustrations, tell me privately, tell the coach. We're going to listen to everything you say, but you've got to be very careful with how you treat people.
Yeah, sure.
What, he can't do this? And if he can't do it, what? They're all insubordinate. Because this makes it sound, by the way, like this team is rotten from the top to the bottom. Because what happens is, as you say, every time they lose a game, everyone's first job is like, right, got to cover my ass, so I better get on this Discord. And by the way, why are these... Here's an idea for you, Hastro. Close down these fucking Discords, mate. Why are there Discords where pro players just talk to all their... Hey, guys, I don't want this to get out there into the wider world, but since you're all just random plebs, I'm just going to tell you guys, what? How can they be telling everyone on Reddit? It's almost like them having this information as social currency. I never could have predicted this.
Or telling your brother who just tweets out even worse stuff because you can't say it because you're a member of the team. But hey, if your brother says it, it's cool.
And yeah, what happens? You walk in on Monday morning, 8 a.m. Why was Wins saying all that stuff about our team? I do not know. Am I Wins? Come on, man. We can't get to the bottom of this one. That doesn't require a fucking... That's not like a Poirot ending where you need everyone in a room. Now, who's been telling Wins what's been going on in this team? I saw a half-eaten piece of bread earlier near the phone. Like, come on. We can figure this one out, can't we?
Oh, my God.
You know what you need to do? These teams need to hire me like that movie Up in the air, and I'm just going to fly in. You're just going to tell me which 3 players I have to keep. I'll just fly in. Let me spend a week there. All I'll do is observe them on their Discord, how they talk in script, and I'll just fire half the team for you. But I'll make sure it's the right half. Just give me observation time, and listen, you've paid 20 million for this. All I'm asking is like $500,000 to do that job. But I'll save your ass.
So I think we can agree that there's something seriously wrong with this team. And
there's something rotten in the House of Dallas Fuel.
There definitely is.
And Effect is fucking Hamlet. And Hastro's the fucking dad, isn't he? So there you go. There you go. I've solved the problem.
That's actually a fucking insane analogy.
Solved the problem, haven't I?
That's right. He's just sitting there to frag or not to frag. That is the question. whether 'tis nobler to get on Twitter and talk shit about myself and my own personal crisis, or actually get in the server and kill some noobs.
And apparently Coco's just like his fucking mother that he's just desperately trying to protect at all costs, even though never appears in the fucking thing half the time. Is he like, where is he? Where is this important character?
Oh my God! Well, there you go. There's the title of the episode.
Oh, everybody who I've been talking to wants the episode of the title to be Dallas versus Fuel. That's the obvious one, right?
Something is rotten in the state of Dallas is definitely,
yeah.
I think the winner.
Do you think it's so rotten, or things have gone? Because culture is one of the things you can change positions, but it's really hard to change the culture of a team or an organization. Do you think they should just tear things down and start again, or do you think these changes are going to be a turnaround?
Okay, here's what we know for sure. There was not enough discipline in this team to keep people in line. There was so little discipline, in fact, that everybody can go do what they want, even though the team, like these players literally have no fear. Like apparently Hastro has told them, stop tweeting all this garbage. And they're like, nah, I'm not going to listen to you, my boss, and go do it anyway.
Contract.
So if that's the case, then I think I understand that there needs to be some change to make the players to keep the players in line. Hastro believes that this change is to give the players more control, even though we have inklings that the players already had a lot of control given what has been said previously. My way of doing it is, okay, maybe Kai wasn't the authority figure that they needed in this team. Clearly, they don't have an authority figure who's like really just coming in and putting that pressure down from the top, right? And putting some infrastructure in place. And I know and really like many of the Dallas Fuel players, and I know they have strong personalities and that it would be challenging to find the right person who would be able to do that. And I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think you need to get a head coach who is going to just sit there with the whip and get everybody into shape and say, this is not how we behave on a professional team. And this is not how we behave in a league environment. Because remember, even though a lot of these players were successful in other games, famously, Dallas has a lot of players that have been playing for a long time in various FPSs. They have never been in a situation that needed as much discipline as a long-form league over this many months. In spite of their time in Korea, this is an even more grueling schedule than they are accustomed to. And as other teams have implemented very strict top-down structures, most notably probably the Boston Uprising that has led to a lot of success, I don't think the Dallas Fuel is going to survive. Well, I mean, they'll always survive. He owns it forever. But I don't think they're going to survive as a team with a winning culture without a very firm hand guiding these players.
Do any candidates stick out in your mind who might be on the short list for head coach for Dallas Fuel?
I mean, I would get somebody from traditional sports, honestly, who has a coaching degree or coaching experience, because you don't need to know the game to try and figure out the best ways for players to interact with each other, try and mediate those conversations, setting up structure for practice, setting up structure for work life as well. You can have your assistant coaches do all the strategy. There's no problem with that. That's how many Korean teams have run traditionally.
One thing I found very curious and suspicious, actually, is the absence of any mention, actually almost at any point in time I've ever seen the Dallas Fuel players complain about their team, about like sort of how well they do in scrims. That never seems to get brought up, because that's the thing, okay? If they were doing just as badly in scrims and they so rarely win and things like, I feel as though people would accept it more. This sounds to me as though maybe they do okay in the scrims and then when they come to the match, it just never happens, and they've got this mad, like, perpetuating self-fulfilling prophecy where they've got all these issues, because that's what's weird. You'd think that'd be one of the things you'd mention, like, oh well, one of the reasons we removed this player was in scrims it didn't work out with him, or one of the reasons we were so shocked that our role change didn't work is in the scrim blocks we were winning 65% of games, and some of them against top there's never any mention of that, and yet that's usually what people go to first of all in esports to give you hope. They'll tell you, oh, but in the boot camp for the League of Legends World Championship we were doing really well, or oh, coming into the season our lineup looked so strong against the top teams. It's very weird that the absence of sort of that aspect within all this. That makes me very curious.
There have been a few instances where we've at least very publicly known that they've run some things in matches that were not run in scrims, like February 23rd, if I'm getting my date right, was the time where Hastro basically admitted to overruling Kai and putting XQC on the roster. So, and it's funny that he actually points out that was the week that they actually went 2-0 and got 2 wins, is when he did kind of overrule Kai and put XQC on the roster. And then there's, of course, the famous instance where, Tymo took too long on the shitter, and that's what caused Siegel to come in and play Diva. So, yes, but we've also seen that the Fuel on more than one instance have run some things in actual matches based on little or no practice.
Right. So wait a minute. So now the rosters have an issues with enough fucking fibre in their diet. What's going on here? What even is this? That's how you get into a team. Is
everybody likes to quote that story. I have a feeling there's a lot more to that story. Like it was kind of a joke when they said it, and now it's turned into this whole thing where people believe that it's some sort of mismanagement. When, the reason it might have happened is because of that, but also you don't know if there was some sort of plan going in that might be a possibility in the future, or they saw it and realized that this was something that they could coach. Because nobody ever says that went well, but they say like, oh, it happened, and then we decide. I guess it must have gone sort of well at the very least, but you don't know what work went in afterwards to make it up to a level where they could perform. And I think that the most ridiculous thing about all of this is that the results were better. So, and the main tank was just acquired. Like OGE was only playing this week. I'm confused as to why you wouldn't give this just a slight bit more time to turn around, because probably most of the players' dissatisfaction was getting their asses handed to them week in and week out. But here they are going to 5 games against New York, going to 5 games against Seoul, trying to integrate this new tank into their roster. And there is a honeymoon phase. And I think that probably a lot of the players were relieved to finally have a main tank player that they were going to be able to practice consistently with. So why not run that for a few more weeks? Why not run it for the rest of the season and then blow it up in the offseason if you have to?
I also notice when I'm reading like their own descriptions of what players are like and statements about them, like a problem I see in this team as well is it feels like there's only 2 types of player in this team. There's a player who's considered a nice guy, but I call them like 4 nice guys because they're the people who just don't talk. That's it. You don't know they're an asshole because they never speak, so who knows? But then again though, as you're about to find out, it can be nice to be around people who just don't talk all the time and say what they think, because the other group of players are incredibly outspoken players. There's nothing in between. Where's like the team captain material, the guy where it's like, right, if I can get this guy on my side, he'll sort of put other people in order, people can trust this guy. Like, you notice a lot of the things about shot calling, etc. It's like they never seem like internally they have a clear direction as a team,
Yeah, absolutely. That's been very clear for a long time right now. And I think Custa maybe could have been that guy, but they traded him because, like Jayne was saying earlier,
he got voted off the island, Monty. They have to let you go at that point.
Ostensibly, the person that you would have wanted to, or like they were having problems with the shot calling, which is why they put Taimu in at main tank, because the most vocal players were like Custa and Taimu. So I think it's and I think Mickey as well, but it's difficult to get rid of those players. So when they were running with or XQC also, obviously a very vocal, like engaged player. So this is like, I think a perpetual problem that they've been having is they haven't had the voices in the game to direct the action, and they're still looking for that. So I agree that having a shot caller, a team captain has been a problem. And even if you do have Custa, he's new to the team. A lot of these guys have been together for so long right now that they may just view him as an outsider or not necessarily give him the full consideration. Not saying that I know that happened, but it's a possibility.
And I have to say, like, this isn't a diss to AKM himself, but if I'm the Dallas Fuel and I had all these internal problems and people who didn't get along and people who didn't agree with the coach, etc., I'm definitely not throwing someone like AKM into the mix, who is clearly shown to be an opinionated person, who has an attitude that seemingly can be quite stubborn and has his own idea. I wouldn't throw another player in there like that. Go the other way, get someone who's just I get along with people. I am an easygoing guy.
Yeah, it's like you're getting to the point where it's the same thing. I think that trading Custa was a mistake. Yes, Unko is a nutty player, very mechanically talented player, but has Dallas Fuel's problem ever been the lack of mechanically talented players? No. So, and like a lot of their trades are weird. Trading Custa away before OG is actually on the rosters. It's just some strange things.
What I love though is that they've got Rascal, they've got OG, they've got Effect. It's almost like they're trying to do that thing like, look, we got you another Korean, we got you a Korean friend, but he's like a panda. He's like, yeah, but I hate him. It's like, oh fuck, can we see if we can find another one? We got to find one that he likes. It's like, nah, I hate him.
We did see how much having Fisher come into the main tank on the Los Angeles Gladiators, that synergy with Asher really helped the Los Angeles Gladiators improve, not remove.
Yes.
It helped them improve, and one of the reasons that a lot of people are giving is the communication between Asher and Fisher, as well as Fisher kind of, helping educate the rest of the Gladiators on how to actually run dive. So yeah, like OGE's shot calling in English, from what I've seen at least, is quite good. He doesn't have the best English, but certainly more than functional in an actual game environment. And even then, maybe his communication with effect will be kind of like the golden egg they've been looking for. So we'll have to see. But
I mean, I don't think so. And the issue. So we also have to talk about what this means for because one of the biggest problems with Hastro's announcement of them cutting Kai after saying he was being given full control is who is going to take this job as head coach right now? So you're walking into a job where the players have control over the coach because they basically voted their own coach off the island, if that's what we're to interpret from the statement, which is not something that players should be able to do. That should be a management only decision, because if they get it in their heads that they can get rid of this coach, and we haven't even talked about possible reasons the players might have wanted to get rid of him. What about, if these players were benched, would they be unhappy with Kai? Maybe if they get rid of Rascal and Kai, they'll see more playing time. Were they unhappy with some of the role changes that perhaps a coach thought was necessary to preserve the communication for the team, like Taimu going to main tank, and they didn't like that? Well, get rid of Kai and you can do whatever you want again. But how is a coach, a real coach who has serious skills, going to come into this team and say, oh, well, if the players don't like me, because it's not your job as a coach to be liked by the players, it's your job to be respected by the players, right? And there's a big difference in those two things, because a good coach is going to make you uncomfortable. A good coach is going to push your limits, and most people, by human nature, reject that. So if the coach has a long-term plan and it's making you in the short term uncomfortable, if you can just get rid of him, who the fuck wants to coach this team? I wouldn't take this job unless I got like 2 years of guaranteed money. So if you fire me, you're still paying me for 2 years. Like, anybody who wants to be the coach of this team should be looking for a massive guaranteed contract, multi-year guaranteed contract, because you can't be in a situation where you have full control or later given full control, and then all of a sudden you're out. You don't have a job anymore. You don't have any guaranteed income. It's just ridiculous. Like, that's the whole scary thing about this is he's like, well, we're going to give the power to the players. It's like, okay, who wants to be a coach in that situation? No real coach wants that.
It also makes me think that this is also why I told you the story about Hastro in CSGO, because the thing that I find concerning is actually a lot of these player moves that they've done do look to me like the players had a say in it. Like getting Unco, come on, what's the odds that had nothing to do with AKM? He just magically arrives, then all of a sudden we have to trade custody to get Unco. Then, and by the way, logically that's why you have to give up actually a piece that could have worked in your team, because who the fuck else are we going to take? We have to take one of the few pieces that's trade bait, don't we? So then you look at the fact that they didn't get any of the big transfers that everyone else has been getting. Architect. Oh, you wanted a Genji player, did you? Oh, too late. Then you've got all the other names that have gone into all the other teams that were Koreans, etc. It's actually quite underwhelming, the trades they've done. And that tells me as well that Hastro, or whoever made this decision, has held on to players for too long. He hasn't made the tough decision of like, this player isn't working, so let's...
Hastro is famously loyal, though. That's the thing.
To a fault, though. Because, for example, in CSGO right now, he has a team that's actually one of the more high-paid teams. But their team is utterly... Like, they are currently on HLTV's ranking, ranked 29th in the world. There's teams above them that make, like, a fifth of their salary and don't even attend all the big lands. So, unfortunately, he has, to a fault, been loyal in that sense. Now, here's the problem with that. Again, if you look at the same scenario, it works when your players are amazing. Obviously, you want to give that guy extra time to work it out, to see if he turns it around. Because if he does, what a benefit, right? But you have to accept some responsibility if it doesn't work out then, don't you? You basically you didn't cut off the arm when it looked like it was starting to get gangrene. And now your whole body's gangrene. And you're firing the doctor going, you've got gangrene everywhere here, mate. You go, get the fuck out the door. The last thing I need is your negativity with all my gangrene.
I just don't know what to say. Like, these are the moves of an owner who is not accustomed to having a franchise team and the security that provides to the ownership. I think in some ways, I am glad that some moves are being made, because obviously the underperformance has been a cause of huge concern given the pedigree of this team traditionally. But I'm not sure, like, I think the biggest problem is that they need more top-down structure, and unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening, and I don't think that's going to solve a lot of these issues.
The thing is, obviously, Huck plays up that whole angle that, like, because he's with the Kraft family and he's in Boston, he's trying to be the Bill Belichick of that franchise, and pick all these players, etc. Fair play to Hastro for doing his best cosplay of Jerry Jones over the last 15 years. And kowtowing to superstar diva players who cause problems, inevitably having to cut them in the end anyway. Shout out Des Bryant. Hope you're not in the league anymore. And
of course, also manipulating the draft and trades for players that he thinks are good while being at a distance. And also, the parallels, they just run deeper and deeper. One of the most popular teams, if not the most popular team in the NFL, with a history of success a long, long time ago that doesn't seem to really register right now.
Any final remarks on this one, Jayne?
You've stepped way beyond my expertise. I don't follow American football, and I don't have any experience running a sports franchise. I enjoy my position as an armchair quarterback. I look at what people do. I say, that was dumb. Why'd you do that? But exactly. Do I have the answer about what needs to be done? No, no. It's the benefit of being a critic. But I'm interested to see what's going to happen with these new, the new coaching or the support staff hiring, because they're not just hiring new coaches, they're also hiring more support staff to the point where, Hastro even talked about hiring a hypnotist of all things. But, it's...
Should probably use it on himself and say, you are now an owner of a franchise team, maybe a coaching place,
Like the league as a whole is very, very young still. And we talked about it on Sunday's recording, where we finally have a little bit better of a path to pro, where we have the tier 2 scene is a little bit more stabilized, and we have these people who are actually going to be earning income so that they can start working towards pro in a more healthy environment. But right now, if we do want to be developing coaches or analysts or assistant coaches or the people through the scene, there's not any sort of structured system for how teams should be, forming their support staff. What is the best combination of coaches, assistant coaches, and analysts that actually makes these teams successful? And it certainly doesn't help that almost all of the really big name coaches and analysts are very, very secretive and shadowy about what exactly they do. And rightfully so. I'm not saying that they should be public with their techniques, because that alone puts them at a disadvantage. But not only do we, as commentators, not really know what people are doing, but I don't think the teams themselves know what the best structure or support staff is for these new franchise teams that we've simply never seen before.
I also think it's important to say that a lot of the frustration with the Dallas Fuel comes from the fact that people really like them, and they wanted this team to succeed, and they wanted them to live up to their legacy. So the fans are, and I do think that the fans are being ridiculous when they were calling for Kaikai's firing, and I think at least something is happening, even if I'm not sure this is the right way to move forward. I do have to say that it's good that there are some changes that are being made actively to try and solve these problems. I really hope that this team turns it around, because I've spent so much time with a lot of these players. I spent more time with the Dallas Fuel players and management than I have with any other team, because of their multiple seasons in Apex when we were both in Korea together. And I really care that they get it together, because I know how good they can be when they're at their best. So I hope something changes, and I hope there is legitimate improvement so they can become a force once again.